Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Issei exposed Razor's secret. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. The wind moved through the leaves of the sprawling trees. The forest night was calm and harmonious, broken only by the songs and rhythms of nature at its most exotic. Animals avoided a particular sector, as if something ominous lay there. A small subterranean hollow was the source of the anomaly. Anyone who listened closely could hear faint metallic sounds like distant saws. Deep within, the main reason for those sounds revealed itself. Scattered dwellings clustered around a huge white structure that served as a laboratory. The screeching stopped. A middle-aged man with dark silver hair wiped his brow and breathed out. Keteria, a dark-complexioned woman with dark brown hair who sat on one of the many gurneys, looked at him with boredom and asked whether he was finished. Ryzavim set a strange metal contraption on the table, the device stained with a dark residue. Before him lay the inert form of a young woman whose features were blurred by the experiment. In the center of her chest a dark blue gem had been affixed and connected to numerous wires and cables. Ryzavim said he wanted to see if it would work this time and confessed that he was tired of killing humans. Keteria expressed doubt about relying on sacred gears and noted that many opposed their use. She admitted to having reservations as well. Ryzavim interrupted and explained that others could not perceive things as he could. He acknowledged that the invention of sacred gears had once been a decisive setback for them, but he smiled as he finished his preparations and declared that they would now use their enemy's own weapon against them. He pressed a final key and the machine glowed as rare liquids were drawn through the wires into the gem. The body reacted with spasms as the gem began to emit light. Keteria watched with discomfort and said she would leave and be informed of the result later. Ryzavim waved her off and remained absorbed in his work. A hooded man entered and bowed, presenting a pile of gems and devices onto a nearby table. Ryzavim praised his work and invited him to stay. The hooded man, known as Tu, approached silently and observed as the experiment reached a critical moment. A sudden burst of energy and a shockwave filled the room. Tu wiped debris from his face and asked if the attempt had failed. Ryzavim urged caution and then confirmed that this time the sacred gear had not detonated. The blue gem brightened and began to levitate, the connected wires turned to ash. A swirl of blue flame and energy coalesced around the gem, smoothing and reshaping itself until it formed a slender, dark-haired woman. The figure collapsed gently onto the stretcher as the residual energy dissipated, and she opened her light blue eyes, groggy and uncertain. Ryzavim introduced himself as her master, Ryzavim Levon Lucifer, and expressed hope that they would achieve great things together. The woman accepted his outstretched hand, her expression a mixture of confusion and admiration that resembled a child's trust in a parent. She asked who she was. Tu explained that she had just been brought to life and that it was normal to feel strange. He offered to fetch clothes for her and then explain why she had been created and what her purpose would be. Ryzavim endorsed Tu as the right person to guide her, affirming his confidence in his aid. Ryzavim moved to a blanket that concealed multiple covered stretchers and felt a surge of satisfaction. He declared that it was time to begin the first phase of the plan. Black feathers drifted slowly to the ground. A shattered window and scattered splinters suggested someone had been thrown through it. The feathers settled onto broken pews and the dusty floor of a neglected church. Silence filled the space, broken only by the presence of a single young man. A brown-haired teenager stood there, watching the feathers fall without speaking. His tormented eyes and melancholic face gave him a somber look. A blond young man called to him from the lower steps, and Issei snapped out of his torment when he looked up. The sight of the girl beside the blonde carrying the corpse of another blonde dragged the old anguish back into him. Issei clenched his fists and turned his face away, unable to look at the body of someone he had once considered a friend. The blonde and the pale-haired girl watched with concern as Issei averted his gaze, prepared to finish what he had started. The blonde called to him again, and Issei acknowledged them by name, thanking Kiba and Kaneko but saying that he wanted to do it on his own. He did not pause when a redhead and a black-haired woman entered through the front door. Both had heard the exchange. The black-haired woman asked Rias whether Issei would be all right, and Rias said that if it was his wish they had to respect it, though much of her attention was on the fallen person cradled in her arms. Issei left the church in hurried steps and followed the last trail of black feathers that marked the path to his target. It was not hard to find the wounded woman crawling on the ground and groaning. Her face showed pure horror when she heard approaching footsteps. She pushed herself up and tried to form a magic circle to escape, but Issei continued toward her with steady steps as her enemies deepened. Issei noted that her wounds were no longer healing, a sign that her magic reserves had been exhausted. The fallen angel fell to her knees and the fragile circle she had been drawing shattered. She begged for mercy, turning her face away, and Issei moved in without words. He seized her wings and, with a burst of force, slammed her into a tree. The motion made clear how much anger he felt. Issei accused her of showing no mercy to Asia and of betraying him, his voice raw with hatred. The woman protested that she had not meant to, but Issei's expression hardened when he called her by another name she had used. He restrained her firmly and then hurled her away. She tumbled through underbrush until she collapsed to her knees, exhausted and on the verge of losing consciousness. A shadow fell across her as Issei loomed over her. She tried to rally and speak of not meaning to, of being forced by a superior, pleading that she loved him, but Issei continued his assault. He struck with his crimson gauntlet, the impact sending shock through the clearing. Rias and her peerage turned their attention to the forest when a tremendous rumble followed by a red light shone among the trees. After that, silence fell. When the fallen woman slowly opened her eyes, she was surprised to find tears running down her face. At a short distance, the towering gauntlet had slammed into the earth, leaving a deep mark and a shattered impression in the ground. Issei could not stop crying as he spoke, telling her that he had liked her and asking why everything had to end the way it did. His grief broke into a heartbreaking question about her betrayal. Issei shouted at Raynare, demanding to know why she had killed him, but Raynare remained silent and unable to answer. The same anguish filled Issei's face. Tears ran down his cheeks. He closed his eyes tightly, teeth clenched in helplessness and pain. His trembling hand reached for Raynare's hand and took the ring she had been holding. Issei accused her of killing one of his friends simply to obtain a sacred gear. He spoke in a controlled voice, the grinding of his teeth betraying how hard he was holding back. Raynare tried to respond, but Issei cut her off and told her to leave. The brown-haired man quickly deactivated his sacred gear so Raynare could move. She watched in stunned silence as Issei turned and walked away slowly, telling her again to go before he regretted it. Raynare remained on the ground, barely processing what had happened. She understood she had failed. Issei had taken Asia's sacred gear, and that meant trouble for her plan. Issei returned to the church crestfallen, red eyes wet with tears. Rias asked whether he had dealt with Raynare, and Issei pressed the ring to his chest, simply stating that Raynare was gone and would never return. The group fell silent, unwilling to upset him further. Rias allowed herself a small, calculating smile, having thought of a way to lift his spirits. Rias noted that Issei had retrieved Asia's sacred gear and asked him to place the ring on her. Issei obeyed uncertainly, not fully understanding Rias's intent. When Issei asked why, she explained that Asia's sacred gear had great potential and it would be a shame to waste it. Rias then revealed her plan to transform Asia into a demon in order to harness that power. After the short ritual Rias performed, everyone waited in silence for Asia to return. Issei was the most anxious, unable to hide his worry. Asia slowly opened her eyes, sat up, and clutched her head in confusion. Issei's shock melted into relief, and he embraced her to show how much he cared. Rias admitted plainly that she had resurrected Asia because of the value of her power and said she would save further explanations for later. She turned to leave, telling Issei and Asia that they had much to discuss. Asia tried to speak, still bewildered, but Issei's embrace and his gentle suggestion that they go home reassured her. The scene drew small smiles from Kiba, Akino, and Kaneko. The next day, Issei began with determination. He resolved to work hard so he could win the favor of the club president, believing that proving his worth would justify the cost of becoming an important part of the team. He thought he could move on from memories of Yuma if he gained Rias's trust and support, and he set his jaw in resolve to train. A classmate named Matsuda tapped Issei on the shoulder and brought him back to the present with news of a new magazine release. Another friend adjusted his square glasses and explained that a new volume of Magical Girl had come out that day. Issei leapt up in excitement, and Matsuda, proud of his connection and pockets, explained that their friend Motohama had secured a copy and that he had the money to buy it. Issei responded with eager interest at the mention of magazines. One of their companions whispered that it looked like one of those perverted volumes they had seen last time, and the three men cleared their throats and pretended to be serious. Issei responded that he would be joining them that afternoon, and his two best friends imitated his slight nod. A chorus of female students called Issei, and he immediately knew who was calling without turning to look. He asked what they wanted while showing a hint of envy with the nickname Prince Charming, which made Kiba force a nervous smile. A girl reminded Issei that the meeting was about to begin, and his disinterest vanished. Matsuda asked him quietly to introduce the other girls in his club when he had time, and Motohama nodded in agreement. Issei promised that everyone would get along well and smiled as he said goodbye to his friends. Matsuda and Motohama froze after hearing Issei call them just friends, both taking his words as a direct hint. Issei walked beside Kiba, and Kiba's presence made many girls stop to stare, mostly at the blonde companion. Issei felt a twinge of envy but dismissed it when he noticed Kiba's unusual seriousness. Kiba had not smiled or spoken since they left the classroom. When they arrived at the old building, Issei was surprised. In the main hall, he saw Rias sitting beside a tall, handsome blonde man who clearly claimed nobility. Razor stood close and rested a hand supportively at Rias's side, and Rias seemed content. He showed the same warm, familiar closeness with Akino, while Kaneko sat near him on the couch, quietly eating a chocolate with a light blush. Razor commented on the new members of the group and invited Asia to come closer, saying she need not be embarrassed. Asia blushed as Razor offered her a gracious smile. Kiba bowed to his club president, and Rias immediately reminded him that Razor deserved respect as well. Kiba apologized and bowed more deeply, but Issei noticed Kiba's jaw tight with annoyance. Razor waved his hand dismissively, telling Kiba not to worry, and observed that Rias had acquired more than one companion. His gaze lingered on Issei for a moment before returning to Asia. Razor asked about Issei's background, and Rias explained that Issei was the wielder of a Longinus called the Boosted Gear and had been resurrected using 8 pawns. Razor examined Issei with interest and noted the curiosity of a Longinus wielder. Issei introduced himself politely to Razor and to his club president. Razor mentioned his name and the prominence of his house, prompting Rias to say that she would teach Issei more about the supernatural world. Razor emphasized the importance of knowing the Phoenix family and its heir, speaking with clear pride. Rias promised to explain more to Issei later, and she leaned against Razor as he rested his hand at her side in a comforting way. Razor then revealed that he, Rias, Akino, and Kaneko were engaged, which surprised Issei but did not provoke outward reaction. He accepted their happiness and resolved to move on and find his own path. Razor thanked Issei and turned his attention back to Asia, asking about her life and showing genuine interest, which made Asia blush further. Issei listened closely as the conversation continued. Razor's visit proved enjoyable for everyone, and Issei found himself fascinated by the high-class demon stories of battles and experience. They also used the meeting to inform the recently resurrected about the 72 pillars and their significance, giving Issei valuable context for the world he had entered. Although what drew the most attention was the Phoenix nobility, specifically Razor, Issei thought Razor seemed a good man as the Phoenix left with Rias, Akino, and Kaneko for a private moment, and he relayed that impression to Asia. Asia sincerely found Razor dashing and handsome, and her persistent blush made her attraction clear. Issei teased that Mr. Phoenix would soon add a new girlfriend to his ranks and joked about an approaching wedding, which made Asia flush deeper and plead quietly for him to stop while she nervously toyed with her fingers. Issei chuckled at her shyness but set the moment aside when he noticed Kiba standing outside, staring at the sky. He told Asia he would go speak with Kiba and waved goodbye, earning a shy smile from her. Kiba watched the clouds pass with his arms crossed, his expression heavy with indecision. Issei startled him with a friendly pat on the back. Kiba returned a nervous smile, and Issei asked if he was all right. Kiba responded with uncertainty, and Issei remarked that Kiba had been acting strange all day and half-joked that perhaps Razor had stolen someone Kiba cared about. Kiba only sighed and said he wished that were the case. Issei's teasing faded as he noticed the seriousness in Kiba's demeanor. When Kiba hesitated, Issei pressed him, and Kiba finally asked if Issei would defend Rias if it came to that. Issei answered without hesitation that he would. He owed his life to the Bucho and would defend her. Kiba clarified that he meant defending her as a friend rather than as a servant, and Issei affirmed that he would stand by his comrades and fight for them. Kiba admitted how fortunate they were to have someone like Issei at their side and hoped the Bucho appreciated him. Issei, uncomfortable with the praise, brushed it off and returned to the main point, asking Kiba what was wrong. Kiba checked that no one could overhear them, leaned in, and told Issei that Razor was not who he appeared to be. Issei frowned at the revelation and asked what Kiba meant. Kiba placed a hand on Issei's shoulder and told him to be ready for later, that he would call when the time came. When Issei pressed for details then and there, Kiba gave him a grave look and said he did not want to tell him now because Issei might not believe it, but promised that once the truth came from Razor himself there would be no doubt. A short time later, the scene shifted to a distant place under a curious night sky that arced like a vast dome. In the distance, a massive industrial elevator descended from the heavens and reached a road that led to a cluster of houses. From that point, dwellings and shops spread across the area, all seeming to regard one central structure, a large white tower perched on the edge of an immense cliff. The night was quiet and oddly cozy, so it stood out when a lone figure moved swiftly through the lower floors of the tower and finally reached the vault. The vault's security was minimal, a simple wooden door with no lock. The figure opened it as quietly as possible and triggered the soft lights inside, revealing a spacious chamber. The figure Raynare, still bearing injuries, entered with careful steps, taking in the rows of shelves filled with sacred gears. Despite the many artifacts, her focus settled on a single spot. Raynare approached a desk where a red sword lay. She held the blade carefully, watching the edge reflect half of her face. In that same reflection she saw someone standing behind her. Raynare spun and leveled the sword, her eyes widening at the figure in the doorway. Azazel stepped forward with a smirk and accused her of thinking she could infiltrate his vault without being noticed. Raynare tightened her grip on the sword and felt her body tremble. Raynare said the name Azazel as if it were a plea. She then insisted she did not know what he meant, keeping her gaze fixed on him as he leaned against the door with a half-smile. Azazel told her that she had been acting suspiciously for years and that demons and priests had given them reliable reports linking her to unauthorized activities. Raynare protested that she was not guilty and that what had to happen, holding the sword pointed toward him though Azazel did not appear. Threatened, Azazel confronted her with a list of accusations, being responsible for Hyoudou Issei's death, Asia Argento's death, the corruption of an angelic institution, and other incidents where she had been a suspect. He stepped forward and his presence took on a tense, dramatic quality, challenging her to explain whether she thought she could escape accountability. Raynare took a step back as Azazel closed in. Despite her efforts to hide it, she felt deep respect mingled with fear for him. She let out a small, uneasy laugh and told him he had no right to judge her, that the conversation had been interesting but she needed to leave. She moved toward the exit, but Azazel blocked her path. Azazel made it clear she did not understand her position, listing the facts. She had broken into his vault, attempted to steal a sacred gear, and been linked by reliable intelligence to other illicit acts. He watched her closely as a charged atmosphere rippled around him, daring her to deny it. Beginning of Arc Chapter 1. Know Yourself. Raynare followed close behind Azazel, commenting that the place felt creepy as they walked to a part of the tower unfamiliar to her. Azazel offered to show her his desk in what sounded like a teasing challenge as they moved down the long corridor. They paused at a window and both watched the sky change. Azazel stood next to her and observed the night collapse into a sudden, brilliant dawn, the stars giving way as light spread across the city. He noted that she must not have stayed long in Grigori and suggested she take in its beauty. Raynare asked, surprised, how they had managed to build such a city underground. Azazel attributed it to a simple word, magic. He suggested they take a shorter route and stepped into an elevator with Raynare following. Raynare remarked sardonically that a shorter way to her end would suit her, and Azazel chuckled. He clarified that death sentences were carried out elsewhere and urged her not to be impatient. They were simply going somewhere they could talk more calmly. Raynare admitted she did not like to talk. Azazel stated that from now on she would. The elevator doors opened onto a small room at the tower's top. The space was austere, a grated floor in front of the elevator, white walls, and a sparse, almost clinical simplicity. The only ornament was a small table with an unfamiliar contraption perched on it. Azazel gestured and the bars across the entrance opened with the faint click of summoning. Raynare stepped in cautiously, inspecting every corner. Raynare realized then that they were not at a punishment chamber but in an interrogation room. Azazel moved to the table and picked up the device, which looked like a magical projector. He said they were there to speak amicably, though his tone suggested otherwise. Azazel explained that a rebel group had formed among the fallen, once a shadow but now actively undermining the factions. He said he suspected Raynare of involvement. Raynare mocked. The cadre's delay in responding, questioning how an organization that claimed to maintain order could have allowed the group to grow. Azazel responded that the group was exceptionally cunning. Their plans usually succeeded, and when they did not, those involved either vanished or were killed without a trace. He paused and glanced at Raynare, then added that things had been like that until this day, since she now stood before him alive. Azazel remarked that it was strange, since the demon's report had declared Raynare dead. Raynare watched silently as Azazel continued to work on the projector, barely paying attention to him. Azazel asked if she was interested in explaining how she had survived. Raynare clenched her sword. Azazel muttered that it was complicated to figure out when she always delegated her work. Raynare moved dangerously close and slashed at him with her sword. Azazel's lowered guard had been an illusion. He turned with a speed she could barely follow and caught the sword in his hand as if it were effortless. Azazel told her the sword belonged to him, took it with simple brute force, laid it on the table and signaled for her to sit. Realizing she could do nothing, Raynare complied. Azazel said it was time to begin their friendly chat and sat in the opposite chair while putting the finishing touches on the projector. Raynare asked what he wanted from her. Azazel reminded her that he had already said. When the projector turned on, a large magical circle materialized, and Raynare told him she did not belong to any terrorist association. Azazel smiled. Azazel asked why she had come to steal one of his sacred gears, suggesting it looked like a desperate move by someone who feared execution for a failed mission and who would be pursued by both the cadres and her group's leader. He leaned back, eyes glittering with suspicion, and said she had been lucky to run into him first, or she would have died by now. Raynare replied curtly that he did not know her, which only widened Azazel's smile. Azazel explained that aside from his interest in sacred gears, he enjoyed hunting down groups that threatened the stability of Grigori, because without good diplomatic relations his collection of sacred gears could suffer. Raynare asked if he intended to hunt her down. Azazel said he had no interest in her personally, he wanted the circus owner and the leader was his true target. He compared the rest of the group to clowns who would fall without their leader's support. Raynare folded her arms and noted his knack for metaphors, and Azazel chuckled. He asked her to answer his questions honestly and suggested he might be able to give her what she sought if she did. Raynare showed distrust but a flicker of curiosity. Azazel asked what she was looking for and why she was doing this. Raynare paused briefly and then said she wanted to finish what she had started. Azazel pressed for clarification, and Raynare declared that her goal was freeing the world. Asked if she intended to become a liberator or revolutionary, Raynare answered that she had been born to be one, her conviction strengthening. Azazel asked how that mission related to killing more humans, pointing out that humans tainted with sacred gears became tools of the supernatural beings from her perspective. He asked how it felt to kill the people she purportedly sought to protect. Raynare replied that it felt great, speaking without hesitation. Azazel asked whether she enjoyed killing indiscriminately, and Raynare countered that a conservative mind could not bring freedom in a world of madness. Her conviction was clear, but Azazel was unconvinced. He reminded her that she had agreed to answer all questions honestly, which surprised her and widened her eyes. Raynare asked what she was supposed to have been doing until now. Azazel said he could not understand how someone who would give up her life for others could also enjoy killing innocent people. Raynare leaned forward to emphasize that the idea of not eliminating what she saw as corrupt created shame and uncertainty, and that softness made one weak and unfit to lead. Azazel laughed. Raynare did not find it amusing. Azazel conceded that among the circus owner's followers she was probably the most determined, and her words made her appear willing to do whatever it took. Raynare interrupted to assert that she was determined to do whatever it took. Azazel said he supposed he must believe her. Raynare nodded without hesitation. The projector lit up after the woman's name appeared, and the device announced that it was decoding files and simulating Raynare's story according to the information collected. The fallen angel looked surprised at the messages that filled the magic circle that functioned as a screen. Azazel observed that if she liked killing people so much, they should start there. He leaned back as the projector worked harder and an image began to resolve into a large church. Raynare recognized the sight and could not help but be impressed. Azazel explained that it was a simulation, not a real recording, tied to the data she had provided, whether false or true, and he suggested that the acts shown were true. Raynare said nothing and only stared. Azazel moved the presentation on to the main point. He recounted that in Greece, 1898, at the Orthodox Cathedral of Oia, the priests had convened for those with sacred gears, but Raynare had come along. The interior image changed to reveal many fallen figures, and the sight made Raynare look away. Azazel mocked her for turning away despite her reputation, provoking a furious glare from Raynare. She demanded to know where he was going with this, and Azazel smiled oddly and said they were only beginning. Cadre then adjusted the player and noted the attack on Canterbury, England in 1903, carried out by a group of fallen angels and renegade priests that had wiped out many demons and taken numerous innocent lives to accomplish their goal. Projectiles and destructive effects assaulted the screen, and Raynare tightened her hands as she watched human dwellings decimated in stylized, chaotic action. Azazel questioned whether she felt clever for instilling fear and committing those murders. Raynare interrupted fiercely, insisting she knew who she was. Azazel suggested she was a lost child and she called herself a revolutionary. He countered that she was good at running away after these things, since no one could prove her guilt until now, and he stopped the projector. Azazel proposed going back in time to when she became what she was. Raynare looked confused and asked what he meant. He turned the player back on and referenced Japan. Raynare sprang to her feet at the mention of that date and demanded that he turn it off. Cadre, watching with interest, wondered why she wanted it off. Raynare shouted and lunged, but Azazel raised a finger to create a barrier that slammed into her and another that pushed her back into her seat, silencing her. Azazel told her to start taking things seriously. Raynare, more receptive than before, asked if he wanted her to reveal the leader of the organization in exchange for freedom. Azazel said he wanted the leader's name, but first wanted her to be honest with herself and stop believing narcissistic lies. He then suggested she was lying to herself and wondered how a certain woman would feel if she saw Raynare now. He restarted the projector, and Raynare's body tensed. The screen showed an adult woman much like Raynare carrying a little girl as they played. The happy moment was abruptly interrupted when loud banging sounded at the doors. A mob of peasants outside demanded they come out, accusing them and blaming their hardships on a supposed curse. The woman's and the child's expressions changed as the door was about to break down. Raynare stood up again, glued to the screen. She pleaded for him to stop the trick and to turn it off, her fear noticeable. Azazel chose to keep the image going, watching as if at a movie. On the screen, the woman stroked her daughter's face and reassured her that she would be loved forever, then covered the child with a mound of straw. The peasants grew angrier, shouting that the drought must be caused by a witch and calling for action against the family. Raynare watched in silence as the mob surged into the hut. In a flurry of frantic, stylized motion, the crowd overwhelmed the mother, striking and forcing her down amid scattered straw and debris. The scene ended with Raynare frozen, unable to intervene. A few drops of rain even reached the clump of straw where the girl was hiding, watching everything in stunned horror. The harsh beating was interrupted by the metallic clang of a blade, and at that sound Raynare's expression shifted from melancholy to sharp pain. She staggered, clutching at her chest as she realized someone had plunged a knife into her. The attacker continued to strike, each blow pushing her closer to collapse until she could no longer stand. Her mother fixed a vacant, fading gaze on her daughter one last time, and despite everything, despite the nearness of death, the mother managed a faint smile for her child. At that moment the projector cut off, and Raynare stumbled backward as a face full of anguish filled the screen. She whispered that it must stop, and Azazel heard her. He replied that he would not stop until she revealed who she truly was. Raynare, on the verge of tears, cried out to stop. Azazel rose from his seat and slammed his hand on the table, insisting she accept reality. The exchange escalated into threats from both sides, each testing the other's resolve. That final provocation pushed Raynare over the edge. She seized a sword and lunged to strike him, but Azazel easily evaded and delivered a heavy blow to her abdomen that sent her reeling and spitting. She fell to the floor while Azazel, already losing interest, looked down on her. He told her she had not been born to cause pain and death, that she was a wounded child mourning a lost mother, and that she would remain that way unless she chose to change. He set the sword back on the table. Raynare pressed her face into her hands, barely holding back tears. When Azazel extended his hand, she hesitated and then accepted it. A man with straight white hair, purple eyes, a violet beret, and a doctor's gown then arrived on the scene. He asked what Azazel was doing here, saying he had been looking everywhere for him. Azazel folded his arms and insisted he had been working. The visitor, Shemhazai, dismissed that and said there was something more important, another attack on a church, and they needed Azazel's help to solve some puzzles related to it. Azazel responded with obvious reluctance but, after some grumbling, agreed to go. Before the elevator closed he left Raynare with a final message to use the time to think of the right answer, and the grates shut. Alone, Raynare said nothing and simply stared at the sword. She tried to wield it and tested the walls in frustration, but the weapon struck without making a scratch. She cursed under her breath and pushed herself up, realizing she could not use magic here because the walls were unusually resilient. She wondered aloud where she was. Her reflection broke when she noticed the large magical circle that served as a screen. Her mother's image remained, and the sight struck a tender chord. Rayna's distant voice filled her mind, encouraging her to believe in herself. Rayna reminded her that she did not have to save people to make her proud, that she was already a hero in her mother's eyes. Rayna urged her to see their home and family as a place to belong, to keep faith in people even if they were sometimes wrong, and to find or build another family if this one ever ceased to be a home. She promised that, no matter how far apart they were, she would always be in Raynare's heart. Raynare's tears flowed as she placed a hand against the screen and sobbed, unable to tear her eyes away from her mother's image. Far away in another place, a different conversation took place. Asia asked about renegade demons as she took notes on the couch, with Issei seated beside her doing the same. The other members of Rias's circle listened while their mistress explained. Rias described renegade demons as those who defied their master's orders and became monsters because of cursed pieces when they broke their packs. Issei tried to show he was familiar with the topic, but Rias corrected him. The transformation into monsters was tied not only to disobedience but, more definitively, to the killing of one's master, though both acts could be part of the same crime and were considered the worst betrayal a servant could commit. Issei acknowledged the clarification and began scribbling down the corrected information. Kiba rose from his seat and asked to borrow Issei for something important. When Rias inquired what it was about, Kiba explained that he wanted Issei to teach him how to counter sword-wielding enemies. Issei looked surprised and flustered. He protested that he had not asked for that, then tried to backtrack and claim he had, standing up with a strained smile. She wondered how she could have forgotten as she rubbed her hair somewhat sheepishly. Rias hesitated for a moment, then decided that her precious SLV must become more powerful and agreed to let him train, but Asia would give him the lesson notes he had skipped. Issei accepted eagerly and left with Kiba. Once they were a short distance from the old building, Issei smiled with complicity at Kiba and said that the excuse had been very good. Kiba replied that it had been no problem and that he really needed to help Issei for what was coming next. Issei asked what was next, and Kiba grabbed his arm just as Issei began to form a magic circle at his feet, declaring that Issei would find out right away. Issei closed his eyes as the large glow of the magic circle spread around them, thinking that he was still not used to moving like this. He opened his eyes and his expression changed completely when he realized where they were. He exclaimed that this was a mansion as he took in the ostentatious place covered in red carpets and decorations, and noticed a great many flags bearing the Gremory insignia. Kiba confirmed where they were, and the tall red-haired man slowly descending the stairs welcomed them to Gremory Manor. Kiba bowed and introduced Issei to the man as Surzex Lucifer, which made Issei realize with shock that Surzex was the Demon King and reminded him of the importance of the 4 Demon Kings. Surzex dismissed their bows with a kind smile and told them to relax. Kiba identified Issei as Hyoudou Issei, and Surzex acknowledged him politely and noted that his sister had acquired a very interesting new partner. Issei reacted with surprise at the revelation that Surzex was Rias's brother. He offered a nervous bow and a shy smile in return. Conversation paused when someone knocked on the door behind them. Issei noticed the number of maids and watched as one opened the door to reveal a girl slightly younger than Issei with blonde hair in pigtails and light blue eyes. Surzex observed that with Miss Ravel's arrival they could begin. Issei recognized her resemblance to her brother and connected the dots. Ravel gave an extroverted bow appropriate to her noble upbringing, then adopted a serious expression and said that it would be more appropriate to continue the conversation in a more private place. Later, in a different room, Azazel entered and immediately saw a sword lying in the center of the room. He also saw Raynare sitting in a corner with her knees drawn up and her face covered. Azazel asked whether she had tried to escape as he took up the sword carefully. Raynare admitted that she had tried but had found it impossible, and Azazel noticed with surprise that the fallen's eyes were wet with tears. Azazel asked whether she had made a decision yet. Raynare rose slowly and acknowledged that she did not enjoy killing people and did not see herself as a liberator. She explained that she acted because it seemed like the only option, because she did not want others to suffer as she had. Azazel listened and asked whether she had ever considered that she might be wrong, or that the better path might be to bring people together rather than tear them apart. Raynare conceded that she had considered it but implied that destruction often felt easier. Azazel finished her thought for her and, after a pause, Raynare stated that if Azazel wanted her help, she would provide it. Azazel smiled with satisfaction and told her that was all he had wanted to hear. He reminded her that he would keep his end of the bargain and give her what she sought. He held out the sword toward her and said that what he offered was power. Raynare looked back at him with confusion and asked him to repeat himself. Azazel watched Raynare carefully in his personal office in the tower where he kept the sacred gears and asked if she was certain about such serious accusations. Raynare affirmed that she had been one of the first to join their ranks and one of their many generals, and that Kokobile had sought her out personally. Azazel nodded slightly and remarked that it was true Kokobile had shown some remorse for ending the last war abruptly. Raynare replied that remorse did not matter to him. What he cared about was the time that had passed since that war and the long peace that followed, and that Kokobile was obsessed with blood and mass slaughter. Azazel's brow furrowed. Azazel concluded that Kokobile was completely insane, rubbed his chin, and asked what she could tell him about the other members. Raynare said she had not shared much with them and could only say they were either fallen angels or renegade priests, and that many had joined Kokobile for power rather than for war. Azazel placed his feet on the desk, summarized that the group consisted of unstable individuals and exiled priests with extreme ideas, thanked her for the information, and offered a faint smile. Raynare asked permission to pose a question. Azazel looked at her with curiosity as she raised the golden sword with reddish edges and asked why he was giving her the chance to gain power. Azazel explained that a few hours earlier a group had attacked a church, stolen all the sacred gears inside, and left no survivors. Raynare looked confused, noting that Kokabeel had seemed unlikely to act for months. Azazel said that observation led him to believe Kokabeel was not behind the attack. From the movements and the absolute destruction left in the attacker's wake, he suspected an even more dangerous organization than the one Raynare had belonged to. He explained that this was why he intended to empower her. He believed in her potential and they needed as many allies as possible to face what was coming. Raynare, shocked, asked if a war was about to start. Azazel let out a short chuckle before his gaze turned dark as he asked whether one-sided genocide could be called a war, a question that made Raynare uneasy. When she asked how dangerous the group was, Azazel admitted he was not certain but noted their attacks had focused on looting sacred gears rather than targeting angels or demons, which left him with a very bad feeling. His expression relaxed again as he said that with preparation they would not have much trouble. He informed her that he had already assigned her to a new group he had formed, that the members were friendly and she should integrate easily, and that he had a house for her. He tossed her the keys and added that the group was waiting in Hyoudou's artificial forest. Raynare asked how he would deal with Kokabeel. Azazel assured her that if she was telling the truth, no one would harm her within his territory. Raynare nodded awkwardly and prepared to leave. Just before she stepped away, she turned back and Azazel warned that he was not a fan of third chances, his eyes narrowing as he ensured she understood. Chapter 2: Razor's Secrets. Issei, Kiba, and Ravel stood in the Demon King's office while Surzex watched them in silence. Surzex suggested they explain the details to Hyoudou, and Miss Phoenix gave a quick nod. Ravel began to describe her brother, explaining that he was the eldest and the successor of the Phoenix clan, and that the title, lineage, and power had poisoned his judgment from childhood. Issei had intended to interrupt to refute, but Kiba gripped his arm and kept him silent. Ravel said that to Issei he may have seemed reasonable, but in truth he was far from that. She lowered her gaze with sadness, recalling that her parents had not meant to raise him with narcissism, yet the upbringing and his great inherited power had made him hopelessly arrogant and worse. Her hands clenched at the memory. Surzex offered her a break, but Ravel declined, saying she had come more prepared this time. She explained that when her brother became worthy of the clan, their parents had been pleased and had granted him the privilege of becoming king of his own peerage at age 12. She had been proud and acted as his first inquisition, but then everything changed. She clutched her dress as she recalled that fateful day. A little over 3 years had passed since then. Although her brother had completed his peerage, she had not yet understood who Razor Phoenix truly was. Ravel felt that her brother was no longer hopelessly arrogant, but he was also no longer the thoughtful role model she had once admired. Tears threatened to fall as she recounted what she had seen. Ravel explained that she had wanted to surprise him after his first battle in the raiding games, so she had sneaked into his bedroom and hidden in his closet. She had been confused when he entered the room with attendants and sealed it with a magic lock, so she had remained silent. At that moment she discovered that he had become a monster. He no longer cared for anyone but himself. Everyone else was a trophy or entertainment to him. She had seen him do something terrible to his attendants. The memory overwhelmed her and she began to cry uncontrollably. Issei felt the shock like a cold bath as he lowered his gaze and could only say that he could not believe it. The Demon King stated urgently that they needed Issei's help. He explained that Kiba had been preparing for some time, but Ravel had only found the courage to tell the truth months ago, leaving little time to prepare properly. Kiba added that if the Dragon Emperor and Issei were on their side, the chances of victory would increase dramatically. Kiba laid a hand on Issei's shoulder. Issei looked at him in dismay, still reeling from the revelation. Issei ran his hands through his hair in frustration and said that if that man managed to marry the club president and the others, they would most likely suffer fates equal to or worse than their peerage. He turned to Ravel and asked if she could not force a trial or produce evidence, arguing that the scars on her companions would be the best clue. Ravel looked away. Ravel answered that her brother had planned for that possibility. He forced them to take Phoenix tears so there would be no trace of what had happened. Issei protested that she was their daughter too and that her parents should listen to her. Ravel replied that she could not risk it. Everyone would see accusations as a desperate attempt to secure succession, and she did not know what her brother might do to her if he discovered she was plotting against him. Those words made Issei turn his pleading to someone else. Surzex responded sternly to Issei's implication that he was useless. Kiba tried to calm Issei and urged him to relax, but Surzex spoke with grave seriousness. He explained that the only legal way to take Rias and the other pledges would be to win a battle just before the votes closed. Believed Razor would agree to fight both of them at the same time due to his overconfidence. Issei interrupted, insisting there had to be another way. Surzex replied that there was not. When Issei pointed out that Surzex was the girl's brother, Surzex reminded him that he was also the Demon King. He said he loved his sister and his family, but he loved all demons and his people as well, and he could not place family whim over duty. Direct intervention would create dangerous friction among the major clans. He had already experienced a time when many clans turned against the Demon King, and it had been far from pleasant. Issei asked if it would really come to war over a marriage. Surzex explained that the situation was more complicated. Illegally breaking the union between two important clans was only part of the problem. The greater issue was that pure demons who could bear children were scarce. Denying that privilege to an heir for a personal reason would be a grave matter. They were speaking about the risk of extinction, and if the Demon King did not follow the rules for survival, then who would? His final words closed the debate, and Issei had no choice but to accept the reality. An awkward silence hung in the Demon King's office for several seconds until Issei asked how much time he had to prepare. Surzex and Kiba smiled when Issei gave his final verdict. The Demon King answered that they had a month. Meanwhile, at Grigori, Azazel mused that the woman was alive only because Issei had not wanted to kill her. He noted with interest that Issei was relying on the boosted gear and found the situation fascinating. Azazel manifested a small magic circle near his ear and said he needed to find a way to speak with Issei. Back in Kuo, Issei sneezed loudly, drawing confused looks from his two friends. Matsuda warned him to be careful not to stain the expensive leaves they were sitting on. Issei's friends fell silent when they noticed he had been staring at the first page for almost an hour. Motohama asked with concern if Issei was all right. Issei apologized that he could not concentrate, stood up, and said he would see them later. Matsuda and Motohama exchanged a look and speculated that perhaps Issei had been turned down by someone at the club or that the matter was something deeper. They decided it would be best not to bother him. Issei walked silently through the streets of Kuo, his expression indecipherable and impossible to explain. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking now. The protagonist moved through the dark city more easily than usual thanks to his demon vision, which he had finally learned to use. With the long journey, Issei decided to call his battle comrade Kiba. Issei called, and his voice sounded crestfallen. Kiba, who was having dinner, set his meal aside and listened with concern. Issei wondered aloud whether Ravel might be trying to slander Razor or maneuver her brother out of succession in order to advance herself. Kiba, watching the restaurant staff move about, explained that he understood Issei's worries but did not believe Ravel would act out of simple greed. Kiba said that Ravel had been raised by Surzex's wife for political reasons, and he insisted that Ravel would not fabricate such a story. He urged Issei to consider Ravel's genuine emotion when she had described what happened. Issei admitted he knew, but he felt overwhelmed. With only a month to prepare, he said they were in a tight spot. Kiba acknowledged the difficulty. Without evidence, seeking help could backfire, and many royal families sought the Demon King position and might do anything to seize it. Kiba pointed out that alliances between powerful demon families were restricted to prevent concentrating too much power in a single heir. Issei made a grim joke about marriage arrangements, and Kiba, smiling wryly, reminded him that such pairings were forbidden. Issei concluded that they were effectively on their own. Kiba closed his eyes briefly, then affirmed that it was just the two of them. Issei suddenly brightened and declared his intention to begin training immediately, even before the academy. Kiba agreed to meet at 5 the next morning. After the call ended, Issei's expression returned to its usual focus. He stopped in front of his house, looked up at the night sky, and silently raised his fist in a private promise. He vowed to save Rias and all of his comrades. The earlier hope of moving on from Yuma through his feelings for Rias returned, but this time his determination was centered on rescuing everyone close to him. He did not allow himself to doubt the outcome. At dinner, his parents noticed their son's conviction and felt proud to see his resolve. Afterward, Issei helped his mother clean up and received a goodnight kiss from her. He greeted his father briefly. His father looked up from his papers and offered a warm smile. Lying in bed, Issei examined the bristling skin along his arm and told himself that a real challenge would begin the next day. He drifted into a deep, restorative sleep. Suddenly he awoke, gasping, surrounded by an immense sea of flames that rose endlessly. He wondered if he was dreaming as a giant form emerged from the fire. He took a step back at the sight of an enormous dragon towering before him. The dragon introduced itself as Drayig, the dragon that resided within the boosted gear, and declared Issei to be its bearer. Drayig spoke calmly but with pride. Issei, overwhelmed, asked if the dragon was inside his body and whether this was a dream. Drayig reassured him that they were battle partners and had tried to communicate before, but only now did Issei have enough power to hear him. Drayig noted that Issei was still weak and expressed the observation bluntly, which turned Issei's fear into determination. Issei resolved to undergo intense training to grow stronger so he could save Rias and their friends. Drayig told him he already knew of Issei's life, ambitions, and shortcomings, setting the stage for the training ahead. Drayig informed Issei that they had shared the same body since his birth, and Issei reacted with surprise at that revelation. The imposing dragon seemed to be aware of everything. Drayig admitted that at first he had been furious that his bearer was a puny degenerate, but now Issei possessed a determination the dragon had rarely seen in previous bearers. Issei's eyebrow twitched at the blunt assessment. Issei asked whether he should take those words as a compliment or an insult, and Drayig laughed, a sound that caused a small flare of fire in the room. Drayig said he liked Issei, and though the boy was weak now, he intended to make him better and help him understand the boosted gear. The celestial dragon promised to help Issei accomplish his goals so that they could both continue along the way of domination, adding that he could not accept a weak bearer either. Issei dismissed the final insult and focused on the offer of help. He welcomed aid from a celestial dragon and, with a toothy grin, extended his fist as a gesture of promise. He vowed to give his best as Drayig's bearer and battle partner to accomplish their shared goals. Drayig's initial surprise faded into a slight, genuine smile, and he expressed hope that Issei's words were not empty. Issei awoke with a hard slap to his alarm clock and realized it was only 4 a.m., so it had not rung. He wondered whether the whole exchange had been a dream, but the gauntlet materialized without his permission and made clear that it had not been a dream. Issei recoiled at the realization that the gauntlet could speak, shaking it in astonishment. Drayig admonished him not to call the gauntlet a thing and made it clear that he could speak into Issei's mind when necessary. The gem in the gauntlet glowed with the demonstration. Drayig promised that Issei would become one of the most powerful beings in the world if he learned to use that power. Issei excitedly imagined becoming strong enough to defeat Razor, and Drayig cautioned that Issei would have to listen and follow his teachings. Before beginning the arduous training, Drayig offered a piece of advice. He warned Issei not to tell his mistress that he had let a fallen angel escape. Drayig explained that, though Issei might trust the woman and feel compelled to clear his conscience, no one should allow such a dangerous enemy to go free because of sentimental compromises. If Issei sought reparation, he might instead face severe punishment for failing such an important duty. Drayig urged Issei to keep the information to himself unless the person he confided in was completely trustworthy. Issei fell silent, bowed his head, and became visibly sad as memories of the woman surfaced. He thanked Drayig and said he would keep the warning in mind. A few minutes later, in an unfamiliar place, Sona noted that Rias had already explained things about her, which would save time. She adjusted her glasses and turned to Kiba to ask what kind of joint training he wanted to arrange. Kiba expressed gratitude for agreeing to their request and explained that Issei had only recently been introduced to the supernatural world. He suggested that Gentru join them as well because he was in the same situation. Sona found it admirable that they wanted to grow stronger because of Rias, but she said the final decision was up to Saji. She fixed her gaze on her subordinate as he stepped forward. Saji claimed he had no problem with the plan, though he admitted that of all the people who could have been reincarnated he had not expected Issei to be chosen. His tone came off as malicious, and Issei noticed the edge to his words. Saji then admitted that he had initially thought bringing Issei was a bad idea but had since changed his mind. He flaunted the fact that 4 pawns had been used to revive him, implying he had 4 times the potential. Sona interrupted, correcting him that Rias had needed all 8 pieces to perform the revival, and she told him to stop making a fool of himself and to remember that he represented her and her family. The rebuke drained Saji's swagger. He offered a forced apology to Issei, which Issei accepted without much trouble. Sona instructed them that training was fine but warned them not to be late for the academy, addressing all present with a sharp look. They responded in disciplined formation, earning a satisfied nod from Sona before she vanished in a magic circle. Issei asked what this place was. Ever since they arrived, Saji had noticed that everything felt very strange. He looked up and saw that the color of the sky and the trees was unlike anything he had seen before. Issei was experiencing the same disorientation, and Saji pointed this out. Kiba explained that they were in the haunted forest, a hell site bordering the cursed forest, and warned that they must not cross into the other forest because it belonged to a dragon king. Both rookies nodded, surprised to learn they were in hell. Before either could dwell on that, Issei's gauntlet suddenly materialized against his will. Kiba clarified that the Dragon King nearby was an old friend and likely would not harm them if he knew Issei was associated with him, but it would be best not to bother the Dragon King without an invitation. Saji and Issei exchanged confused looks. Saji then asked who was speaking, and Issei explained that the voice belonged to Drake, the dragon celestial residing in the boosted gear. Their connection had only been established that day. Saji, who possessed a fragment of a Dragon King himself, turned pale at the mention of a dragon celestial and remarked that the many fragments used in Issei's reincarnation made more sense now. Drake spoke plainly that, because Issei contained only a small fragment of a soul, talking to Vritro would be impossible. Instead, Drake said he would teach Issei the available skills over the coming days, starting from the basics. Issei nodded seriously. Kiba told them it was time to begin and led the way into the forest. As they followed him, Issei whispered to Saji that he resented being paired with him, and Saji replied that the match made sense. They were evenly matched and Saji's magic type would help Issei adapt, since Razor used many ranged attacks. Kiba added that Vitra's power was impressive, which piqued Issei's curiosity. After warming up, Issei's first spar was against Saji. He had been confident at first, assuming they were both rookies, but Saji proved faster and Issei was unable to dodge Saji's absorption lines. The technique hit him before he could react, and Issei fell to the ground in defeat. Saji wondered aloud why Issei's teammates had lasted longer. Drake observed that Issei's magic reserves were poor and suggested focusing on increasing his reserves and physical strength, which embarrassed Issei, who had presented himself as a valuable asset. Kiba explained that as Saji practiced and perfected his power, Issei's body would adapt to store more magic through exposure to absorption lines. Saji worried about the potential side effects of overusing magic, asking whether excessive magic consumption could cause severe headaches or fainting. Issei responded with resolute determination that he would accept the cost to become stronger. Drake was pleased by Issei's resolve and instructed him to do push-ups and squats while Vitra's power consumed his magic. When Issei tried to protest that it was too much, Kiba commented approvingly on the idea, and Issei muttered his displeasure at Drake's bluntness. Saji gave a derisive chuckle. Kiba then warned Hyoudou to prepare as ropes began to float around Issei. Matsuda, Motohama, and Asia, who had just introduced herself to the class, watched Issei with concern. Issei had gone pale, almost translucent for a moment, and he seemed on the verge of collapsing, but the small red dragon restrained him so he would not lose control. Thankfully, the bout of magical exhaustion also allowed for a relatively quick recovery, and after a proper breakfast Issei had regained his energy over the next few hours. Conversation with Asia and his close friends had helped distract him from the stress that had settled over him. He could now understand the idea that ignorance sometimes spared one from worry, though that comfort was short-lived. The pressure returned when he attended his club, because the presence of the other girls reminded him how important his training had become, and he felt unable to speak about it. Issei made a quick trip home to change clothes and take a second shower. His parents were there and asked where he had been. He told them he had gone for a run to clear his head, and his parents were pleased that he was focusing on healthier activities. Training resumed into the afternoon. Issei learned several new things and discovered that Kiba's speed was so great he could barely track him with his eyes. Kiba warned that there were many enemies even faster, and Issei would have to become accustomed to that. Hours passed with repeated clashes and long breaks, which Issei used to have Draig explain the workings of the boosted gear. Draig warned him not to overextend his limit of boosts because the cost would be too great. He also taught Issei about a rare ability called transfer, which could pass all received boosts to a companion. Issei instantly understood why Draig had said that transferring one's power was not a very useful skill. Handing over strength left the user completely vulnerable. Still, Issei felt there were times and strategies for everything. Draig then explained a unique ability of the boosted gear that sounded very interesting and excited Issei, but the dragon warned that Issei would need to keep building his physical stamina and reserves before he could use it without fainting. A week of training passed. During those 7 days, Issei, Kiba, and Saji were summoned by their respective mistresses to fight for a chance to visit the family kingdom. Rias won the contest, but Issei and Kiba declined the trip to continue training, and their mistress accepted their excuse. At first, Saji thought training Issei was a waste of time. Kiba had already shown some improvement, but Issei had not. Even so, Saji admitted that he was impressed by Issei's willingness to endure without complaining. That determination made Saji want to keep training alongside him, the boy's steady resolve rubbing off on him. Kiba felt similarly, though he believed Issei could improve even more. By the second week, Issei found himself genuinely liking Kiba. He no longer teased him with the old nickname and treated him with respect. His relationship with Saji did not advance as much, but he no longer felt uncomfortable or annoyed around him. Spending so many hours together had naturally brought them closer. The third week flew by. Issei felt his level finally improving. He was less physically exhausted and needed fewer breaks, though his magic reserves still depleted quickly. Saji noted that Issei had lasted 12 seconds longer than on the first day as Issei lay on the ground pale and suffering a powerful headache. Kiba agreed that it was not a bad number. Issei sat up on the grass, holding his head, and admitted with obvious discomfort that he still felt weak. Draig pointed out that if Issei did not believe his own weakness, it was time to use the boosts again. Issei's face lit up at the permission he had not been given in 3 weeks. He clenched his gauntlet and activated the boost 5 times in succession. He immediately stood and while he did not feel dramatically stronger, he quickly noticed his dizziness had vanished and his magic reserves had increased significantly. Kiba remarked with a smile that being able to chain 5 augmentations in a row was clear progress. Encouraged, Issei challenged Saji to try draining his magic once more. Saji shrugged and agreed. This time Issei lasted almost a minute before collapsing to the ground with a thud. Saji, serious, acknowledged that Issei still endured far less than some of the others, but the increase in power was undeniable. Issei rose again with effort and asked Draig whether this would be enough. Draig replied that Issei was not ready yet and was still too weak, but promised it would come soon. Disappointed for a moment, Issei quickly recovered his steely determination and resolved to keep striving to the end. Draig, rarely proud of his bearers, admitted that Issei had earned the Heavenly Dragon's respect almost from day one. After the long training session, Saji left and Issei and Kiba were alone again. As they often did, they sat on the lawn to talk about trivial things before dinner, but this time the conversation deepened. Kiba told Issei that he had improved a great deal since training together and thanked him. Issei responded that they would do whatever it took to save the club president and the others, clenching his fist. Kiba said he had already said it before, but that Issei was a good man and that it was reassuring to have someone he trusted working alongside him to stop the madness. Issei rubbed the back of his head, embarrassed by the praise. Kiba studied him more closely and grew serious. He observed that Issei did not do it only for their friends. He had noticed how Issei looked at the club president. Issei admitted plainly that he wanted to catch her attention. He praised the club president as someone extraordinary and said he would not give up trying to win her. He added, with a wry smile, that Razor was a JRK and that fate had placed him in the way. Kiba commented that it really did look like Issei was in love with her, and the remark made Issei's smile falter. Issei had not forgotten Raynare. He probably never would forget her. He told himself that the scar she had left would no longer hurt once the club president was safely in his arms. Or at least, that was what he thought. What? Issei stammered, struggling to find the right words, and Kiba chuckled at his awkwardness. Kiba reassured him that there was no need to be nervous and that this would be a great step for him to get closer to her. Kiba wished him luck and added, with a wide smile, that he might even catch the interest of Akino and Kaneko. Issei raised an eyebrow and asked what Kiba was implying. Kiba then mentioned, almost teasingly, that harems were permitted under the laws of the underworld. Issei's eyes went wide, and he leapt to his feet with excitement at the thought of fulfilling one of his biggest dreams. His initial grin faded quickly when an image of Razor crossed his mind and he muttered that he would end up like that man. Kiba responded seriously that Issei and Razor were completely different people. He did not want his friend to compare himself to someone he considered trash. Issei admitted that a harem felt complicated, that he did not know how to love many people equally, and that he was unsure if he could or even wanted to do that. He rubbed his hair and trailed off when his expression turned somber. His thoughts clearly settled on someone specific. Kiba watched him with concern and asked if something was wrong. Kiba placed a hand on Issei's shoulder, and Issei offered a weak smile, saying he was just tired. Kiba accepted that and suggested they meet the next day, advising Issei to return with his own magic circle since his boosts now gave him plenty of reserves. Issei brightened at the idea of being able to travel without causing inconvenience. When Kiba disappeared, the joy Issei had displayed vanished with him, leaving a vacant, serious expression. He stared up at the night sky with his arms crossed and silently wondered what Yuma would be doing out there. Dawn found Raynare practicing in the artificial forest. Sweat beaded on the grass from the morning dew as she wrapped her feet around a tree and did sit-ups. Her workout clothes were practical and form-fitting. She remained composed despite the exertion, having clearly started early. Raynare executed a backward somersault, demonstrating the agility she had developed over the past month, then stretched quietly as she looked over the constructed woods. Two men approached slowly. One, speaking with a clear foreign accent, teased that an early start did not seem to be in the other's vocabulary. The other man bristled, asking if he was being insulted. The first man clarified that he was not Chinese but a Korean. Raynare watched them with a bored expression and asked if the two intended to start bickering so early in the morning. She then noticed the absence of their usual companion and asked where Rick was. They explained that Azazel had called Rick away for something important and mentioned that he would be assigned a new training partner for a limited time. One of the men admitted he could not remember the newcomer's name, complaining that the unfamiliar names were hard to recall. Raynare's impatience grew as they finally produced the name she had been dreading to hear, Hyoudou Issei. Chapter 3, Undeniable Proposal. After a long, early morning, classes ended and Issei walked happily alongside Asia, who had become a close friend in recent weeks despite their limited time together. Asia spoke with her gentle smile, explaining that Miss Rios, the club president, was very pleased with how hard Issei was trying to improve himself. Asia added that Hyoudou was also happy, though he was already accustomed to intense effort, and that she herself had been pleased with her own progress during the past week. Issei clenched his fists at the news and said he was sure that once the club president completed her peerage they would be unstoppable in the raiding games. He breathed out, excited at the idea of friendly competition and the chance to meet more supernatural beings, especially demons. Asia then mentioned that Razor had said he would help the club president once his current commitment was fulfilled. Issei stopped on the stairs and asked, with more seriousness than before, whether Mr. Phoenix had been coming by often. Asia confirmed that he had visited several times. Sensing Issei's sudden change in mood, she asked if he was bothered that they had not told him. Issei tried to hide his unease with a nervous laugh and said that he was okay. He then asked if Asia had spoken with Razor much. Asia blushed deeply and began to explain, then hesitated and admitted that she did not think she had told him everything she wanted to say. He had been so kind to her during those 3 weeks, and he had been so considerate that Asia could not help but feel certain about things. Issei's suspicions were almost confirmed after hearing that, but he needed to be sure. Issei opened the door to the academy exit and asked whether the man had proposed to her. Asia lowered her gaze with a shy expression and answered that he had proposed that she join his household. At first she had hesitated because they had only recently started seeing each other, but he had assured her that once their marriage was formalized he would not add anyone else to his household. Issei stopped listening. His mind raced too fast for calm thought. Asia paused and looked at him in confusion when Issei suddenly grabbed her shoulders and told her to stop. He urged her to take more time, warning that Razor might be hiding something strange and that it was foolish to rush into marriage with someone she had known for only 3 weeks. His hands tightened on her shoulders until she winced. He began to speak in a way that risked revealing a secret, then clamped his mouth shut. Asia began to sob, and he immediately realized he had made a mistake. Before he could apologize, Ria stepped forward and struck him hard, sending him stumbling back onto the ground in full view of the other students leaving the academy. Rias wiped her hand with a handkerchief and accused him of defaming her betrothed. Akino and Kaneko stood with her, both clearly displeased, while Kiba watched Issei with concern. Issei sat on the ground, cupping his reddened cheek. Rias harshly called him ungrateful and a liar. Asia, still tearful, spoke that she considered him her best friend and had expected him to be happy for her. Then she fled, crying. Rias told Issei that belittling other men would only make women despise him, and she turned away. Kaneko declared his behavior disgusting and followed her mistress. Alone, Issei thought aloud that he had been training so hard for the girls and that he cared deeply for Asia above most others. Akino crouched in front of him and offered advice. He should not lie, because they were all too interested in Razor for deception to go unnoticed. She added that, beyond his looks, Razor possessed great power, renown, reputation, and an enviable heritage, and she questioned what Issei could offer in comparison. After that, she collected herself and left. Kiba helped Issei to his feet. Issei admitted he should not have spoken, but explained that Asia was one of the few people he truly loved. Kiba warned that Issei had narrowly avoided a worse consequence and informed him that Razor was present in the club room and would likely learn about what had happened. Kiba advised Issei to apologize rather than make the situation worse. Issei reluctantly went to the club room and, as he entered, understood from Razor's composed expression that the man already knew everything. Issei apologized to Asia and to Razor, addressing the Phoenix respectfully. Razor accepted the apology and embraced Asia, holding her close in a gentle, protective manner. The Phoenix and his companions were seated on the couch while Rias observed from the center desk. Razor noted that Issei had tried to denigrate him in front of one of his women. Razor replaced his smile with a serious look and told Rias that, since Issei had apologized, he would reduce the punishment they had discussed by half. Issei lifted his face to meet his club president's expression, bewildered by what that punishment could be. Razor continued that the sentence would not be 20 lashes but only 10. Issei went completely pale, and everyone noticed. Kaneko stated that Issei deserved that for insulting and belittling, her stoic expression showing faint annoyance. Kiba tried to defend his friend, pointing out that Issei was still confused about everything that had happened with Raynare and that he was simply afraid. Rias interrupted with a frown, asking if they were serious. Was that minor matter enough to absolve him of guilt? The redhead made it clear she would not accept dissent. Issei felt those words hit him like a sledgehammer, replaying little thing and insignificant in his head until his eyes widened in shock. The idealized image he had of his beloved club president seemed shattered in seconds. Kiba, surprised by Ria's harshness, commented that she was being too rough, that it was not easy to face such things. Rias, however, expressed disappointment that Kiba would defend Issei when he had endured worse himself and never complained, ending with a resigned sigh and the assertion that Issei needed to learn that bad actions had consequences. To everyone's surprise, Asia stepped forward to defend Issei, saying that he recognized his mistake and was likely only worried about her. She insisted that she knew Issei well enough to believe he had simply been shocked by the news. Issei looked at Asia with pleasant surprise and relief. Issei finally bowed his head and admitted that Asia was an important friend and that he had been afraid she would be hurt again. He said he wished Asia the best and that, if she believed Razor was the right man for her, he would not argue further. He smiled, but the words cut him. He knew Razor was far from the man Asia believed him to be. Still, he resolved to keep up the facade for one more week. Kiba seized the moment to point out that Rias might have reacted to how they had insulted her beloved Razor, which made Rias cough and flush awkwardly. Razor rose and spoke gently to Asia in response. Asia asked for Issei to be left in peace. After that, Issei decided to leave quickly, saying he had to continue discussing training with Kiba. The excuse was partly true, but more than that he wanted to get away from Rias. He felt a sudden need to put distance between himself and her. Kiba watched him go, listening to the constant sound of the straw Issei was skiing. He could see how much the events had affected his friend. Kiba apologized on Rias' behalf, explaining that Rias could be temperamental with those she loved and that she did not truly know who Razor was. Issei lifted his face from his empty drink and murmured bitterly that he could not expect a woman born into privilege to understand his pain. Kiba agreed that Rias had been wrong to be so hard on him. They sat in silence for several seconds before Issei said he thought he would take a break that day. Kiba gave him a hard look and hesitated to ask what he meant, the question hanging in the air. Issei explained that he no longer wanted their attention after what had happened, but he still cared for his comrades and for Asia, one of the few friends he had. Kiba understood and nodded, but urged him not to rest when he clearly seemed troubled. Issei's gaze dropped, and he looked vulnerable in a way that unnerved Kiba. Issei then admitted, in a voice full of darkness and sadness, that he could not bring himself to kill Raynare. Kiba looked baffled and leaned closer. Kiba warned Issei in a low, serious tone not to tell anyone else about that there could be frightening consequences. Issei said that Drake had advised the same and that he had told no one else because he trusted Kiba and because he had intended to do something about it. Kiba understood, and a sad, sympathetic smile crossed his face as he watched Issei nod slowly. Kiba accused Issei of wanting to use Rias as an excuse to forget her, and Issei immediately clarified that he had genuinely wanted to fall in love with Rias, though recent painful memories made him think he should look elsewhere. Kiba did not voice what he really thought. He recognized that Issei could love another woman. Behind his perverted reputation, Issei was loyal, protective, and kind, qualities that would attract many. Kiba also suspected that Issei was trying to fill the emptiness in his heart until he could truly fall in love again, a process that would take time, especially if Raynare was still a threat. Because Issei did not seem to realize this himself, Kiba chose to stay silent. Kiba told Issei that there were two ways to deal with such problems: face them directly or try to forget them. He recommended rest and clarity of mind for the latter and added that training would be pointless if Issei's thoughts were elsewhere. Issei thanked him with a grateful, tearful expression. Kiba reminded him that friends were there to help and understand one another. The conversation eased Issei's spirits, but he did not expect a surprise waiting for him at home. Issei's parents met him at the door with folded arms and stern expressions. He asked if something had happened, and his parents exchanged glances before his mother demanded to know why he had been leaving so early every day. His father noted that Issei went to the academy but did not return until late. Issei explained again that he had been going out to train. His mother pressed whether it was every day, and his father remarked that the sudden change worried them. When Issei asked what else he might be doing, both parents spoke at once and accused him of using drags, leaving an awkward silence. Issei reacted with disbelief and lifted his shirt to show that he had not been using drags, revealing a slightly more muscular torso than before. His parents were surprised that he had gained that much in just 3 weeks, and he admitted he had been trying very hard. He also thought privately that being a demon had accelerated his progress, but he hoped his parents would not take that into account. Fortunately, They seemed reassured by his effort and not worried about the other thing. Issei felt sincere relief that his parents cared so much, even if they worried excessively, and he resolved to enjoy his time with them. He went to his room to change. His parents had already laid out casual clothes on a chair for him in case he arrived early. As he dressed, he noticed a black feather among his things and picked it up uncertainly. When he looked up, Azazel stood on the ceiling, leaning with dark, majestic wings. Issei reacted with a shocked exclamation and stumbled over a chair, falling to the floor and crawling until he bumped into the door. Azazel motioned for him to be quiet and asked if he wanted to worry his parents. Issei, bewildered, asked what a cadre wanted with someone like him. Azazel noted that Issei's knowledge of fallen angel hierarchy saved unnecessary explanations, introduced himself as Azazel, leader of the fallen, and stated that he was there to help. Issei remained distrustful despite the claim. When Issei questioned how he could trust him, Azazel smiled and implied a threat. If he had wanted to harm Issei, Azazel suggested that Issei would not have noticed. Azazel then placed a hand on Issei's shoulder and whispered in a chilling manner that Issei would not have known until it was too late. The contact froze Issei, then Azazel stepped back. The tense atmosphere eased as Azazel reiterated that his purpose was to help. He offered his assistance with a half-smile and watched Issei carefully. Drake proposed a plan as an extremely kind and selfless man, speaking from the gauntlet. Although the evidence suggested he did not intend harm, Issei still hesitated. Azazel urged that they listen, asking what they had to lose. Issei fell silent after hearing. Drake and considered the proposal carefully. He replied to Azazel that he was willing to hear him out but remained guarded. Azazel explained that he had spoken with Surzex and been told that Issei was on a training mission to claim Surzex's sister as his wife, and that completing it required defeating a demon high-class razor. Azazel added that Surzex had altered some details to mask the true plan. Issei frowned and asked why Surzex had told Azazel about the secret. Drake said that since the events of nearly a month ago, Issei had attracted his attention. He admitted interest in the sacred gear but found it odd that someone with such power had not become obsessed by it as many previous bearers had. Issei looked at the gauntlet in surprise as Drake explained that most of his bearers had considered themselves gods upon discovering the power. Very few remained sensible. Issei expressed that the situation still felt strange and asked Azazel, cautiously, how Surzex could know he was ordinary. Azazel remarked that calling oneself ordinary while possessing a Longinus, a weapon that could kill gods, was interesting, and he laughed softly at Issei's self-description. The laughter faded and Azazel's expression grew more serious as he prepared to be frank. Azazel asked how Issei explained that Raynare was still alive when she was supposed to have died by his hand. A cold tension settled over Issei at that question. Azazel quickly reassured him that he had not told Surzex, knowing the topic troubled Issei. Azazel said that Raynare would likely have faced severe consequences if Surzex had known the truth. Many would have demanded revenge and she would not have been spared punishment. Issei answered by calling himself an idiot. Azazel countered that he saw someone who gave second chances. Issei hardened his expression and insisted that he would never give someone like Raynare a second chance. Azazel acknowledged the hurt Raynare had caused but said they were there to address it directly. He proposed that Issei could close that chapter of his life and, as an additional offer, undergo a special training regimen under Azazel's command. The proposal caught Issei's interest despite his efforts to hide it. Azazel outlined two ways to handle problems: face them directly or forget them. Issei recalled his friend's words, clenched his fists, and decided he wanted to face her directly. Azazel accepted that as a yes. A short time later, in an unknown location in England, Azazel and Issei walked through a vast, empty meadow. The wind whipped the tall grass that stretched for miles. Issei found the sight peculiar, green ground meeting light blue sky in a serene sweep. It was beautiful, but another unknown weighed on him. Issei asked hesitantly whether this was where they would train. Azazel said the place was fine but that they would be more cautious. They were heading to Grigori, the city of the fallen angels. Issei glanced at him with curiosity and asked why they could not teleport there. Azazel explained that Grigori's unique structure prevented direct entry to deter ambushes and maintain security, a system that had become necessary as the city had shifted from a warrior stronghold to a populated area. Issei nodded, still puzzled, and asked where the city was when he could see nothing. Azazel replied that it lay right below them. Issei's eyes widened when Azazel pushed him from behind, sending him through the grass and into a strange giant cube. He barely regained his footing before a pair of spears were aimed at his neck. One of the three fallen questioned their reason for visiting in a gruff tone. Azazel landed gracefully, helped Issei to his feet, and stated that Issei was accompanying him. The three fallen addressed Azazel with respect and announced that they were descending. Confused, Issei watched as the cube began to shake. The metal walls opened slowly, and Issei walked to an armored window to see a gigantic underground city rising beneath them on a slow elevator. An artificial sky, enormous and tiny magic circles, lights, dwellings, and vegetation revealed a magical world that thrilled him. Azazel placed a hand on Issei's shoulder and welcomed him to Grigori. Issei could only marvel at the sight. They stood in silence for a few moments before Azazel resumed the conversation and addressed how he had convinced Surzex to bring Issei here. Azazel admitted that it had taken 3 weeks of persuasion and had been very difficult. Issei thought the man was a nice enough person, though strict and careful, fitting his reputation as Demon King. He turned his gaze to the impressive view as Azazel explained that Issei would be his ward for the week and would live in Grigori until the internship ended. Azazel presented keys and a stuffed puppy labeled with the address of Issei's temporary home and reassured him that arrangements had been made with his parents and the academy. Issei smiled and acknowledged that Azazel took things seriously, relieved that everything had been organized so he could train uninterrupted for the remaining week. When the elevator finally stopped, Azazel, a cadre, offered a tour of Grigori. He explained that movement up and down was controlled by that elevator and that the artificial sky was supported by powerful barriers maintained by the cadres, who rotated shifts to recharge it with magical energy. The path they followed divided into 9 roads, and Azazel described the city's structure: 8 neighborhoods with dwellings numbered from 1 to 300, and a red road that led straight to the heart of the city. Issei asked about overcrowding, and Azazel answered that they simply created new neighborhoods when necessary, since space was plentiful. Azazel noted that the supernatural population was not very large, over 2,200 homes, 124 businesses and facilities, and a modest total of 8,643 inhabitants. He added that a quarter of the residents were not fallen angels and that Grigori had been designed for unfortunate citizens, which explained the lower population. He also mentioned, without dwelling on it, that their species had suffered in centuries of conflict and that having children was not a simple matter. Issei responded that everyone lived their life in their own way. They continued talking until they arrived at a large, striking structure. Azazel pointed out Larabahan, the largest supernatural prison in the area, and explained that only a few fools were kept there because the worst offenders were executed immediately. Issei nodded, understanding the severity implied by Azazel's words, and followed him through lively streets where people shopped and chatted as if in any ordinary village, despite being underground. Azazel indicated a disused subway passage to Robunheim and explained that it was no longer used. He did not elaborate further, and Issei saved his questions as they continued toward the final landmark. Azazel then showed him the heart of Grigori, also known as the Tower of Hope, emphasizing the majestic marble tower and the vast precipice beyond it. He described the tower as the home of the cadres, the center of the latest technology, and the location of diplomatic meeting rooms and other important facilities. Issei observed that the place could be called the command center, and Azazel acknowledged the thought. A man of a similar age to Issei approached and bowed slightly to Azazel. His hair was dark and tousled, a short beard framed his face, and his light blue eyes contrasted with the simple black, lightweight clothing that hinted at a disciplined physique. Azazel apologized for the delay from the long walk, then introduced the newcomers, Hyoudou Issei as the newest member of the group and Rick Graham as Issei's temporary tutor for the week. Issei offered a friendly greeting, and Rick returned it with a quiet smile before asking Azazel if he had brought the translator device. Azazel fitted a small device over Issei's ear and explained that it was an advanced magical translator. Though it still needed refinement, it would allow him to understand and speak with others without difficulty. Issei appreciated the demonstration and acknowledged the technological prowess on display in the city. Azazel said he would not take more of their time and suggested that Rick give Issei a light workout that day, then patted Rick on the shoulder and departed with a raised hand. Rick assured him he would follow through and then guided Issei with a hand on his shoulder toward their training area. Rick explained that training took place in an artificial forest to avoid disturbing civilians and mentioned that their group numbered about 5, counting Issei. He added that Issei already knew the group's only female member in name only, and Issei's expression turned serious. He admitted that saying he knew her was an exaggeration and that he did not truly know her. Rick responded with a grave note, acknowledging that Azazel had informed him about Issei's difficulties. He advised Issei that the best course was to focus on the immediate future and the training ahead. Rick told Issei that the rest he would figure out as he went along. Although Rick's words had sounded complex and almost meaningless, Issei understood them perfectly. He knew he had more important things to focus on, but the truth was that he had come here precisely to face his nightmares. Issei thanked Rick for the advice and said he planned to do both, which drew a faint look of surprise from Rick and a small, shared smile. Rick offered to give him a light reprimand if he stumbled, and Issei replied that he would be offended if Rick did not. Raynare moved in small hops as she struck a magical barrier repeatedly. Nearby, 2 men she had spoken with earlier trained together. One wielded a chained sickle and wore a pocket watch around his neck, while the other manipulated a sword formed entirely of air and wore a golden cross. Issei approached Rick quietly, tapped one of the barriers, and the sound drew the attention of the 2 training men. Rick positioned himself beside Issei to instruct him, suggesting they start with a few right hooks and promising to correct stance and form. Issei drifted half in a trance as he watched a silhouette of a woman training behind some trees. He nodded absently to Rick's instructions. When Rick reached behind the barrier to hold it up, Issei began the suggested practice. After a few beats, his gaze betrayed him and he turned his head to where a figure slipped through the trees. Raynare emerged, hair tied in a ponytail and a sheen of sweat from practice marking her exertion. She and Issei shared a brief, intense look that neither seemed to know how to handle. Raynare felt Issei's stare acutely. Issei quickly looked away and resumed training as if she did not exist. The American quietly commented to his companion that it seemed there was a lot of tension between the 2 of them. The man with the pocket watch responded that, from his perspective, it looked like they might want to kill each other. The remark drew a wry agreement. Tension and awkwardness persisted for the next few hours, making training more complicated than usual. As night fell, Rick found himself alone with the 2 friends while the others had already left. The American noted that neither had been able to properly introduce themselves to the newcomer, and the man with the pocket watch agreed, mentioning that they had not yet told Issei where they would be staying for the week in the new city. Rick explained that he had planned to, but Issei had said he had other plans, and the 3 fell into a reflective silence over the arrangement. Raynare pushed through the forest, practicing her sword stance and frustratively reminding herself how difficult it could be to learn what should have been simple movements. She wondered why Azazel had brought Issei here, knowing it would be impossible for them to work together after what had happened between them. Her moves grew firmer as she worried about how their friction might affect everyone else. Issei then appeared suddenly and, on his approach, stumbled and fell to the ground after Raynare accidentally struck him with an elbow. Raynare immediately covered her mouth in shock as she saw Issei sprawled with a bleeding lip. Issei joked that they had not even spent a day together and already seemed to be trying to kill each other. Raynare apologized repeatedly and offered a hand to help him up, though she hesitated, aware that Issei might be reluctant to accept assistance from her. Issei accepted the gesture with a slight smile and half admitted that approaching without warning had been his mistake as well. He quickly turned the conversation to a practical matter. Issei pointed out that they were disturbing their companions and that neither of them had performed properly that day. He reminded her that he had not come solely to get stronger. He had goals and would not let anything stand in his way. Raynare admitted she did not fully understand his meaning and wondered whether he intended to challenge her or had another plan. She did not want to provoke a direct confrontation. She was aware she currently held the advantage and did not want to repeat past mistakes. Issei surprised her by proposing a truce for the sake of peace. He suggested they be civil to one another for a week so as not to bother themselves or those around them, explaining that after that week they likely would not see each other again. Raynare listened, taken aback by his unexpected proposal but relieved by the offer of a temporary, practical solution to their tension. Issei finished his speech by saying that the past would never be forgotten but must not stand in the way of their goals. He tipped his hand forward and smiled broadly, then asked what she thought. Raynare took only a few seconds to decide, recognizing it was the best option by far. She returned a faint smile and shook his hand, agreeing to be friends for the week. Issei moved around her while making a few boxing gestures and commented that she was training, asking whether she had already gained the power she had been seeking and teasing her by using the name Yuma. Raynare snorted in amusement as she watched his gestures. They had reached the city and were walking along nearly empty streets because it was so late. She said she needed to train harder to reach her goal and told him to stop calling her Yuma now that he knew her real name. Issei's smile widened in a peculiar way, and Raynare could only shake her head at his teasing. Raynare then invited him to dinner at a restaurant near her house. She pointed out the large clock in the night sky showing 1:07 and explained that the restaurant stopped taking orders after 2. Issei admitted he had always wondered how England's food tasted, and Raynare mocked him for waking up every day thinking about it. After a short walk and light conversation about the city, they arrived at the restaurant. Two long-haired women in dark waitress outfits who looked like twins greeted Raynare warmly. Raynare introduced Issei as Hyoudou Issei and identified the twins as Chloe and Babette Fairbeauty. Issei admitted he might forget their names, and Chloe reassured him with a smile while Babette added that it had taken them 5 years to learn how to pronounce the names properly. Issei nodded awkwardly, unsure where to look. Raynare handed Issei a menu, and he realized the translator was useless because parts were in French. He asked if they had a full salad. Raynare prompted him, and the twins began listing options: Paris-style salad, Savoy-style salad, Lion-style salad, Nice-style salad, Landis-style salad, and a warm goat cheese salad. Issei, overwhelmed, asked for something with lots of lettuce and eggs. The twins suggested the Paris-style salad, and Issei agreed hesitantly. Chloe asked if Raynare wanted her usual, and Raynare nodded. Babette snapped her fingers and plates were prepared and placed before them. Chloe asked about drinks, but Raynare said they would order drinks before leaving. Raynare used her fork on a tender piece of braised rooster in wine while Issei stared at the salad, trying to process how quickly the order had been placed. He mentioned that since he was training, he had to watch his eating. Raynare laughed at his prideful posture and teased that he needed a lot of protein to keep up such a strenuous pace. When Issei insisted he knew that, Raynare placed a large piece of meat on top of his salad, surprising him. The twins watched and giggled as Issei, in turn, placed some of his salad on Raynare's plate. They exchanged a short, complicit look and ate from each other's plates in companionable silence. The twins suddenly asked how long they had been dating. Both Issei and Raynare reacted with raised eyebrows and said that they were not dating. Issei explained that there was a misunderstanding, and Raynare teased that he would most likely be furious when the week of internship was over. Issei rubbed the back of his head and warned her not to push it too far. The twins remained surprised and confused by the exchange. After Raynare paid for both their dinners this time, they left the restaurant and walked in silence, taking in the unique beauty of the night. Issei remarked that it was very late and that he should head home. He stopped and asked whether she could lead him or give him directions, then tossed his key, which Raynare caught easily. Raynare smiled at the small puppy keychain, finding it cute, but the smile vanished when she noticed the address printed on it. She gave Issei a look that conveyed sudden disbelief. Issei, puzzled, asked what was wrong. Raynare touched her face and muttered that he had to be kidding her. Chapter 4. Last Preparation. Issei lay on the lower bunk of a bunk bed and thought about what had just happened. Issei told no one in particular. That he knew people were supposed to live together in the city, but he had not expected Azazel to assign him to this particular house. and he watched as clothes were laid out on the top bunk. Raynare folded the blankets and remarked with slight annoyance that Azazel liked to play pranks, even if no one else found them amusing. Issei shrugged and acknowledged that at least they agreed on something, reminding himself that it would only be a week. His attempt to find a silver lining settled the room into a quiet, somewhat awkward stillness. Issei asked if she was awake, and Raynare replied that she would be if he stopped making noise as she tucked her hands under her pillow. He then asked how she had ended up there, mentioning that their first encounter had left him thinking she had no ties to Grigori. Raynare explained that all Fallen were affiliated with Grigori in one way or another and admitted that she had been severely compromised after failing her mission and losing much of Kokobil's forces. She clarified that she had never been close to Grigori but had been forced to infiltrate their ranks. When Azazel captured her, she made a deal. He would protect her in exchange for help and information about Kokobil. Issei asked who Kokobil was, and Raynare warned him not to interrupt before continuing. She recounted how no one initially suspected a cadre was behind the killings, how a lack of evidence led to a court case where Kokobil was found not guilty, and how Kokobil disappeared the same night without filing reports. Days passed with no news, and Kokobil was then considered a criminal for desertion. As a result, Raynare's own crimes were set aside so long as she did not disappear from Grigori again without authorization. She acknowledged that she owed much to Azazel, who had spoken on her behalf. Issei could only think that it had not been easy, and Raynare gave a small, genuine smile as she agreed that the first week after arriving had been difficult. She described the people of the town as warm and welcoming, quickly making her feel part of the community. Issei smiled and observed that even Azazel could seem like a decent person despite his habit of appearing unannounced. Raynare asked if Azazel had shown up at his house, and Issei admitted that he had appeared on his bedroom ceiling, which had nearly frightened him to death. Raynare laughed, and Issei was surprised that the laugh was normal and contagious, not the forced or fierce laughter he had heard before. He found himself laughing with her before the moment passed into silence. Raynare, looking conflicted, asked if in a week's time he would face that man for Rias Gremory's hand. Issei reflected that he always took the difficult route, and Raynare's comment about bygones being bygones implied they had reached a fragile truce. She then apologized, and Issei was taken aback by the sincerity of her words. He could feel that the apology mattered to her. He thought about it for a few moments and then closed his eyes to sleep, wishing her good night in his mind. The next day, in the Grigori forests, Raynare encouraged Issei to hit harder as she guided his movements, stopping his punches with practiced ease and teasing him about his form. Issei fired back in frustration, and when Raynare drew nearer to correct his stance, she positioned herself behind him in a coach-like manner and adjusted the placement of his limbs to improve his balance. A friend noted from the side that the pair's closeness might be creating tension, and another friend watched with a satisfied smile. The training continued, and the hours passed quickly. Issei remained at Raynare's side as she taught and helped him with patient instruction. In fact, they both looked happy. The first break finally came in the form of lunch, and everyone gathered for some sandwiches. During the meal, Issei was introduced to teammates he had not yet met. Alan Sanchez introduced himself as Argentinian and added that Rick was from the United States, while the other man went by the name Young Len's son. Young Len corrected them, saying he was a Kolean, matter-of-fact and apparently used to that kind of conversation. Issei apologized for his bad temper from the previous day, rubbing his hair nervously and worrying he had made a poor impression. Alan downplayed it, telling Issei that Rick had mentioned the two of them had a complicated past. The Korean in the group teased that everyone here could be impolite except for the American. Alan responded with a sarcastic challenge, goading Young Len into a show of bravado. Young Len shot back with a taunt calling Alan cowardly, and the two men briefly locked eyes in a tense, competitive stare before easing off. Issei whispered to Rick that the argument looked intense, and Raynare shook her head at their antics. Rick explained quietly that the two fought like brothers and that Young Len had helped Alan adapt to the city when he first arrived. Issei asked how they had all ended up in the city, and the question drew a serious expression from everyone. Rick explained that, as Azazel must have told him, the city was a place for the unfortunate. He said that each of them had a tragic past, whether from their own mistakes, bad luck, or both, and that being different often brought hardship. The group fell silent, each recalling a past that felt distant and yet always present, like a scar on the heart. Issei waved his hands and insisted they did not have to share more, and Raynare found a way to change the subject by asking if he had told his training partners he would be staying for the week. Issei chuckled as he recalled the stunned reactions when he had explained that Azazel himself had sought him out. He then stood, bowed deeply, and introduced himself properly as Hyoudou Issei, expressing hope that they would get along during the week. The others smiled and welcomed him, thinking it would be good to have someone with such an open, sincere presence. Among them, 4 days later, in Grigori Woods, Issei learned an important lesson. Sacred gears were more significant than he had first realized. Each companion wielded a different power. Alan could form a wind blade, young Len could summon a chain sickle with mysterious properties, Rick used a precise weapon, and Raynare carried an elaborately designed sword that could unleash an immense burst of flame when needed. He discovered that the twins at the restaurant could use sacred gears to prepare food and drinks, each with their own power from birth. This showed him that sacred gears were not solely for offense. Some could feed or heal, and other kinds might defend. The possibilities seemed endless, and Issei began to understand Azazel's intense interest in these devices. Issei also spent time speaking with Draig, who was reluctant to speak broadly because of resentment toward a woman who had harmed his previous bearer. From their conversations, Issei learned that many of the sacred gears in use by some fallen angels were unusual but not entirely outside the norm. Rick's sacred gear was ordinary but made dangerous by his training. What caught both Issei's and Draig's attention most was Raynare's sword. Draig sensed that the weapon was far from ordinary. It radiated a familiar, draconic power. Raynare said she did not know its origin and only that Azazel had given it to her without further explanation. Azazel himself appeared to visit rarely, checking on Issei's comfort and whether anyone was troubling him. He never questioned the training directly, which left Issei wondering if there was more to the man's demeanor than met the eye. Through conversations and training sessions, Issei learned that his teammates were growing stronger to protect the place they called home and to resist the criminals who followed Kokabeel. There was also another reason for their efforts that everyone called classified, so Issei had to remain in the dark on that matter. The daily training and camaraderie brought Issei closer to the group despite their short time together. Rick was the calm, analytical presence who felt like an older brother keeping the others in line. Raynare appeared friendly and steady until training began, when she enjoyed teasing and pushing people's buttons. Alan remained unpredictable, his mood swinging between relaxed and sharp, while young Len came across as the most serious until he engaged in banter with Alan. Overall, the team had settled into a rough but dependable rhythm, and Issei felt a growing sense of belonging. Azazel liked to see it that way. He often watched them from one of the many cameras monitoring Grigori, a surveillance meant for the city's safety but mostly used by him for gossip. The link that helped him most was Raynare. It was true that Issei would never forgive her and would never forget what had happened between them, but having her close and receiving her apology had helped him stay focused on rescuing his fellow demons, especially Asia, his best friend. He told himself that once this was over, he would leave Grigori and say goodbye to Raynare for good. The plan gave his heart some measure of peace. His heart was almost at ease, though not entirely. Issei watched the night sky with troubled eyes. He held the ticket that confirmed him as a guest at Razor's wedding the next night. He sighed as he leaned back on a tree branch, observing the artificial moon and the stars. Draig's gauntlet materialized, and Draig asked if he was all right. Issei replied that it was nothing and that he was just thinking, letting the breeze stir his hair. Draig reminded him that he could talk if something bothered him, and Issei smiled at the concern before ending the conversation and returning his attention to the invitation. He finally looked down when he heard footsteps and widened his eyes at the sight of Raynare. Issei stood up, astonished to see her there. Raynare scolded him for the late hour and asked if he intended to stay outside all night. She took a couple more steps and Issei noticed she was carrying 2 bottles of sake. Issei asked why she had 2 bottles. Raynare answered that she had not brought them just to show him and suggested the wedding was bothering him, saying alcohol could relieve sorrow and tension and urging him to drink with her. Issei protested that he was only 17 and therefore underage. Raynare dismissed the objection, claiming he had already drunk with her before, implying that meant he was no longer a minor. Issei argued that the logic made no sense. Raynare teased that she had not expected him to be so cowardly. Her provocation made Issei bristle and deny being a coward. Raynare opened a bottle and took a long drink, then challenged him to prove himself. On impulse, Issei opened the other bottle and drank. He immediately began to cough at the burn, and Raynare laughed and warned him not to gulp a full bottle if it was his first time. Issei insisted he was fine, but a faint blush crept across his face as his balance wavered. He looked at his hands in surprise and admitted the sake was taking effect and making him feel lighter. Raynare covered a laugh and said she thought he was already a little drunk. She then added that alcohol could do more than just lift the mood, and without warning she took Issei's hand and led him deeper into the forest. He asked where they were going and she told him it was her secret place, one she visited in early weeks to feel better. Issei's curiosity grew. As they continued, the forest changed and animals began to appear around them. Issei tried to pet small birds while Raynare guided him along a split log to a large pond filled with shimmering fish. They crossed the log and Issei admired bushes with shiny fruit and the pond below. Looking up, he saw the leaves form a circle framing the moon. He whispered that it was beautiful. Raynare tugged on his hand, and Issei noticed how she looked in the moonlight among the decorations. What shone most was her smile. It was not fake or cruel. It reflected genuine feeling and sympathy and made her seem kinder than Issei remembered. He shook his head to dispel the thought and asked why she had brought him there, attributing his sentiment to the sake. Raynare sat at the edge of the pond and said she had brought him to distract him and give his mind a rest. She admitted she could see he cared a great deal about that girl and wanted her, though she was mistaken. Issei teased her about worrying over him, and Raynare, unexpectedly serious, stated that she did care about him. Raynare lowered her gaze, sighed with a hint of annoyance, and apologized, saying she understood that her concern was the last thing he wanted. Issei was surprised. It was the second time she had apologized, and she looked genuinely troubled. He removed his shoes, dipped his feet into the pond, and leaned his chin on his hand, asking whether she had come there to feel better. Raynare had expected the question and did not appear sad. She placed her bare feet in the water as well and asked if he had ever done bad things and tried to convince himself they were harmless, the sort of childish mischief people excuse to their younger selves. Issei admitted he had, smiling at the memory and mentioning that his parents had scolded him, which made them both laugh. Raynare confessed to many pranks too, admitting she had convinced herself she was doing the right thing and, in doing so, had lost something of herself. She took a long drink of sake and added that in the end someone would always come along to show you how wrong you were. Issei teased that Azazel did have a habit of doing his job, and they shared a chuckle that turned into laughter for a few moments before silence returned. Issei raised his bottle and remarked that this was a good place to drown sorrows and worries, and Raynare agreed, clinking bottles with him before taking a long drink. Their cheeks flushed and they sighed with quiet pleasure, then exchanged a shy laugh. They both looked up at the night sky and the bright moon above. Raynare said she had meant to ask him for a while whether what he was doing was right. If the girl did not love him and loved someone else, he would only be hurting her. Issei said he understood and found it ironic that she was the first to ask him that. Raynare suggested that others presumed he had a clear motive and therefore did not ask, and when Issei asked why she had asked, she admitted curiosity. Issei called that a lie and insisted she was really acting out of concern. She argued she did not like him worrying about her, and he replied that he preferred being lied to even less. They traded playful barbs. She called him complicated, he called her an idiot, and laughed while keeping their eyes on the moon. After a few moments, Issei grew serious and took a swig from the bottle. He asked her to be honest and pushed the point that she did not care about Rias as much as she cared about the coming fight. Raynare curled her knees under her chin, rested her cheek on them, and asked if she could be frank. She said that his ability was nowhere near rivaling a high-class demon and that his lack of power worried her. Issei acknowledged the truth but said he was hopeful things would change the next day. When she asked what made him so sure, He admitted he planned to learn a very destructive new technique and hid a small smile. Raynare called the idea impressive, and while catching the last drops from her bottle with her tongue, she questioned whether that technique and the help of his blonde friend would be enough to stop a high-class demon. She doubted that even the 5 of them together could defeat this particular opponent. Issei asked seriously whether the demon was that strong, and Raynare explained that the real problem was the opponent's immortality. She feared he would simply be overwhelmed rather than plainly defeated. Issei muttered that he could not give up. Raynare glanced at him sideways, having missed the whisper, and he rolled his eyes before pressing his bottle against her lips and saying he should stop drinking because it would make him sick. Issei's eyes slowly opened. He brought a hand to his head and groaned. When he tried to move, he realized he was in a complicated situation. Raynare was asleep against his chest with a gentle smile. He noticed they had not returned to the apartment. Water lapped against his leg and half his body had fallen into the small lake, soaking his pants and Raynare's clothes. Through a gap in the leaves, an artificial night revealed a huge clock marking 5:41, and a magic circle appeared near his ear as the communicator activated. Issei frowned and addressed Azazel through the device, asking when he would arrive. The communicator relayed Azazel's reply that he would come as soon as possible. Issei tried to get up, but Raynare tightened her hold and held him in place. He sighed in frustration. He tried to wake Yuma by shaking her shoulders, but she did not stir. A loud sound over the pond drew attention and the woman sat up, rubbing her cheek in anger. Issei urged that there was no time to waste and they should return to the tower to change and freshen up, noting that Razor would be there in 2 hours. Chapter 5. Murder. They entered the Tower of Hope together. Issei noted that Azazel had not needed to come along, and Raynare said she wanted to meet Razor herself. She added that Razor had no idea who she truly was and that Azazel's protection ensured she was not in danger. The small hallway opened into a large room filled with armchairs around a round table. The walls were lined with large portraits, each labeled with a cadre name. Azazel sat cross-legged on the table and remarked that they had arrived just in time. Issei asked why they had not been warned earlier, and Azazel admitted he had simply forgotten. When Issei pressed about what Azazel had been doing at 6 in the morning, Azazel replied that he had stayed up all night and now intended to rest. He rose and joked that he had been with his sacred gears and had let them look after a guest, prompting an annoyed sigh from Raynare. Raynare clarified to Issei that Azazel's lovelies referred to his sacred gears, not women. Issei suspected Azazel had acted to annoy him, and they wondered whether they really needed to greet Razor in person. Issei's suspicions about the visit remained uneasy. A few minutes later, Razor entered the great hall and froze at the sight of Issei and a woman he did not know. The two were seated in separate chairs, keeping a polite distance, and a tray of food and 3 cups of coffee sat ready on the table. Razor first addressed Issei, assuming the young man would be the one to greet him. Issei explained that Azazel had arranged for them to do the honors since they were already acquainted. Razor accepted the arrangement with a dismissive smile but made his attention clear toward the woman. He sat down nearby and relaxed as if he were at home. Raynare noted his confidence with a teasing expression. Razor offered a courteous compliment and asked for the woman's name. Issei identified her as Yuma and then asked why Razor had come. Razor explained that his wedding would take place that night and that, until then, he still had opportunities to form alliances. He expressed an interest in forging ties with fallen angels and asked whether Yuma might consider such an arrangement in the spirit of alliance. Raynare played along with light banter, and Issei observed Razor's self-assured manner while remaining cautious on the sidelines. Azazel asked Razor if he would like to become one of his wives and gave Raynare a teasing look. Raynare replied that marriages were boring and that she preferred to remain free. She then leaned playfully toward Razor, causing him to startle. Razor had never faced a woman with such boldness before. Not even Akino had ever pushed him this far, and he laughed at his own surprise. Razor smiled in a way that made his interest clear. Raynare said she preferred to enjoy the moment, especially with a man like him, but regretted that she was very busy today. She rose and walked away toward the nearby restrooms, and Razor watched her go with a confused expression. Issei thought she had only been playing with him and took a sip of his coffee while watching Razor. Razor asked Issei if he could persuade Raynare to become his wife, since the two of them knew each other. Razor hoped to have such a proud woman among his companions, and the idea of winning her over himself excited him. Issei said he would try but could not promise anything, and then asked if there were any other women Razor was interested in. Razor turned his attention to a particular painting, a woman with long purple hair and matching eyes, creamy skin, and a small mole at the left corner of her lips, her expression serious and stoic. Razor observed that some women were clearly out of his league. Issei mentioned that he had not seen Penemu at all since he had been here. Razor explained that Penemu was Grigori's secretary and therefore always very busy, amused that Issei would want to meet a woman so high in the hierarchy. Issei said he would speak to Yuma but did not expect to be able to persuade her. Azazel sipped his coffee while listening. Razor told Issei to do his job and put in a good word, adding that if that did not work, then she was not worth the effort. He then took another taste of the coffee and, to his own surprise, declared that it was delicious. Raynare, who had just come out of the restroom, smiled and said she had prepared everything. Razor complimented her as being very skilled. Issei thought about how they had always gone to that restaurant and that he had never tasted her food before. He concluded that she was an excellent cook, and the smile on his face faded as his gaze drifted to the ceiling. He told himself that cooking would be the one thing he would miss about her. An hour later in the Tower of Hope, Razor stood and straightened his gold tuxedo. He thanked everyone for the pleasant conversation and regretted that no one had been available for a longer chat. Raynare noted that perhaps he would have had better luck convincing someone if he had not come on the very day he was getting married. Razor explained that his wedding arrangements and his duties as heir and an upper-class demon kept him extremely busy. He nodded to Issei and told him he expected him at the wedding before departing. After the door closed, Raynare whistled to draw Issei's attention. She observed that although Razor claimed he had no time, his behavior suggested otherwise. She had met men like him often enough to recognize the type. Raynare asked how Gremory could have fallen for someone like that. Issei admitted he did not have a good explanation and guessed that Razor had simply had more time to get to know her. Raynare said she had not been fully supportive of Issei's plan before, but now she offered her full support. Issei noticed her change of heart with interest and asked why she had changed her mind. Raynare explained that her own experience with men like Razor made it clear he was self-centered and treated others like trophies. Issei nodded in agreement. Issei then said that was why he wanted to help save her. Raynare reminded him that yesterday it had seemed he was acting out of personal interest in the woman, noting the shift in his stated motives. Issei stood and announced that it was time for his last training session, and he left without looking back. Raynare remained seated, watching his retreating figure with curiosity. She suspected he was keeping things from her but chose not to press the matter. Outside Grigori a short while later, Drake instructed through the gauntlet that everyone should use all augmentations, which drew immediate attention. Young Linus, how long ago the connection with the dragon had been established, reacting with surprise. Drake explained that he had always maintained the connection, but he had been reluctant to speak because of Raynare, a fact he did not think required further explanation. Raynare looked away as the others acknowledged what had been said. Drake added that the situation would remain unchanged if they ever met again. Drake clarified that this was a special occasion. Issei clenched his fist tightly, and the gauntlet responded with a reddish glow. Issei activated boost 12 times, ending with a fierce shout. Drake observed that 12 increments was his new limit and that it was not bad. Issei looked at himself with wide eyes and noted that he felt very light. He threw a punch into the empty plane and felt a rush of air sweep around his arm, finding the sensation unbelievable. Drake acknowledged the significant improvement but warned there was still a long way to go, and directed their focus to the dragon shot. Everyone turned their attention to the gauntlet. Issei, excited by the prospect of a powerful new technique, listened as Drake explained that each sacred gear had either an element, a unique ability, or both. The boosted gear did not have an element but compensated with 3 versatile unique abilities. Issei raised an eyebrow at the description, and Drake, annoyed by the interruption, reminded him he was still too weak to focus on that. He clarified that Issei already knew the first two skills, boost and transfer, and that the next was Dragon Shot, a magical ability that materialized extremely fast without a magic circle and could be a dangerous weapon in the right hands. When Issei asked how to use it, Drake explained that the potential of a magical attack depended on the user's magic. He added, however, that Issei's current augmentations granted a large increase in magic enough to produce a powerful dragon shot and that all Issei needed to do was concentrate that magic into the boosted gear. Issei closed his eyes and raised his open hand. A faint breeze drifted across the stage as a tiny sphere formed in his palm and grew to the size of a soccer ball. He opened his eyes in surprise. He had never used magic like this during training. Drake warned him to decrease the sphere's power before throwing it. Issei hesitated but followed the order, reducing the attack by half. Drake insisted he reduce it further, and Issei complied repeatedly until the sphere had been diminished to something even smaller than a golf ball. Drake explained that the idea was to be able to fire multiple dragon shots and avoid exhausting all of his magic on a single cast, and that they did not want to create unintended problems since Grigori was right below them. He instructed Issei to shoot at the mountain. Issei pointed toward the mountain, troubled that his magical limitations prevented a more powerful shot. Drake urged him not to overthink it and simply shoot. Nodded, focused on the center of the mountain, and felt his hand and then his entire arm tense as energy swelled. The tiny sphere suddenly expanded, and Drake's voice resonated through the gauntlet as Issei released the attack. A torrent of crimson magic surged from his hand, ascending at high speed until it struck the mountain with a tremendous explosion. When the smoke cleared, a large crater marred the mountain's face. Everyone stood in stunned silence, taking in the destruction caused by the single attack. Raynare expressed astonishment, and Rick, Alan, and young Len reacted similarly. Drake laughed at their expressions and asked if they still believed Issei's power was insufficient. Tower of Hope. Several hours later, Azazel said he hoped they had not worn Issei out too much. Rick replied that they had taken it easy that day and placed a hand on Issei's shoulder, inviting anyone who doubted to ask him. Issei smiled and confirmed he felt no fatigue. Azazel folded his arms and warned that Issei would need every last drop of his strength that night. An awkward silence settled, and Azazel broke it with a clap, announcing that this was Issei's last day there and suggesting they say their goodbyes if they wanted. Rick stepped forward and offered his hand. Issei returned the smile and shook it confidently. Alan approached and acknowledged that the memories in that place could not all be good because of their companion, but suggested they could still pay visits. The Argentine clicked his tongue sympathetically and mentioned that he preferred men as he extended his hand. Issei smiled and offered his own in return, saying that the arrangement sounded perfect to him. Young Len admitted that he had never been good at goodbyes and wished Issei the best, and Issei accepted the farewell without hesitation. Once the greetings were over, Issei's gaze settled on Raynare, and their eyes met for what might be the last time. The silence between them felt significant and awkward. Issei took a couple of steps until he stood directly in front of her, their quiet stare stretching for several seconds before he spoke. He told her he had not forgotten. Raynare acknowledged that he hadn't. Issei added that the time apart had helped clear his mind and that their time together had managed to calm him. He admitted that it had altered his impression of her. She was not the unhinged, sadistic person he had feared, or at least not to the degree he had imagined. Raynare chuckled softly at his assessment. She teased that she might still be inclined to harm him if he kept provoking her, placing her hands on her waist and suggesting people rarely change. Issei answered with a weary half-smile and a firm resolve that he would hold onto his convictions for as long as he lived. Raynare raised her hand as if to make a bet and suggested they might test that next time, but Issei interrupted and stated there would be no next time. Her smile softened into a little sadness, then she nodded and lowered her hand. She had gotten carried away. It was clear he would not take her offer. Turning away, Issei moved to greet the last person. He began to thank Azazel, but Azazel interrupted with a knowing smile, reminding Issei that he had been invited to the wedding by Surzex and would only accept Issei's words once Issei completed his objective. Issei smiled in response and said he would see Azazel later, then looked around at the friends who had been his training partners and thanked them for the time they had shared, calling it truly magical. Everyone nodded in agreement. Raynare remained expectant. After the others departed, Azazel and Issei noticed Raynare was still there. Azazel raised an eyebrow and asked what she wanted. Raynare announced that she wanted to go to the wedding, surprising the usually relaxed Azazel and making Issei gasp at the danger of being caught. Azazel intervened to reassure Issei, offering that Raynare would not be discovered if she behaved and that he would make sure of it. Raynare gave him a small nod. Issei protested, but Raynare insisted she would simply watch. She claimed it would be entertaining to see him interrupt the wedding and be comically overpowered by a fiery adversary. Issei was incredulous, and Raynare retorted with a challenge about judging her choices of amusement as she placed her hands on her hips. Issei watched her for a moment, then shook his head and moved toward the exit. Before the door closed, he glanced back and reminded her to stay committed to fighting training, adding that she was not a very good comedian. A few minutes later in the occult club, Issei, now wearing a tuxedo with black pants, shoes, and shirt, expressed gratitude for the suit loan and lamented that it might get damaged, promising to pay back when possible. Surzex assured him that financial repayment was unnecessary. His family's wealth made money a non-issue. Kiba complimented Issei on how he looked in black. Issei, with a hesitant tone, replied that he would say the same about Kiba but that yellow was not his favorite color, which drew a smile from Kiba. Issei adjusted his tie and asked about the plan. Kiba explained that there would be a moment when intervention would be allowed and technically legal, though the situation would be more complicated than a normal wedding. Issei admitted he disliked rich people's ceremonies, adding that he meant no offense to Surzex, who dismissed the slight with a wave. Surzex then asked if everything was ready. When Issei and Kiba nodded, the relaxed atmosphere shifted to a heavier one as Surzex straightened his gaze. Surzex reminded them that the mission ahead was very dangerous and that they were not obliged to accept. He warned that he would not be able to intervene to help because his family was involved in the wedding, and he candidly stated that the probability of victory was low. He then asked if they understood the consequences of failing. Kiba and Issei exchanged looks. Issei said frankly that he did not fully care about the demon's opinion of him. He might be judged harshly for the rest of his life, but he was willing to shoulder that if it meant saving his teammates. Kiba expressed the same determination as Issei. Issei, curious, then asked why Surzex was risking so much, pointing out that while Razor deserved condemnation, he seemed unlikely to endanger Surzex's sister unless greater forces were at play. Surzex placed a hand on Issei's shoulder and explained that not everything depended solely on his sister. Surzex spoke with absolute seriousness, and Issei found himself impressed by the conviction in the Demon King's voice. Issei admitted with a chuckle that he needed to apologize for assuming the whole family was the same. Surzex raised an eyebrow and asked what he meant. Issei looked confused, and Surzex's own confusion deepened. Kiba warned them that it was getting late, saving the moment as he usually did, and Issei acknowledged him with a subtle glance. Surzex decided not to detain them any longer. He created a magic circle at their feet and told them to take a few seconds to prepare before disappearing, leaving a charged silence behind. Kiba adjusted his tie and broke into his typical grin as he turned away, but then he collapsed to the floor. Issei extended his gauntlet and moved into position beside him, remembering Raynare's grim warning from that night. Issei reminded himself that, despite doubts, he could not give up because of his conscience. He resolved not to let a valuable friend go down with him. Later, in hell at the wedding ceremony, Issei stood beside Azazel and a hooded woman. The hooded woman pulled her hood back to reveal herself as Raynare. Issei said that he had been handling a bit of business, and Azazel asked where his blonde friend was, noticing that Issei was alone. Raynare and Azazel exchanged uncertain looks when Issei did not answer. Ceremonial music filled the Colosseum and applause followed. Issei observed Rias leading the line of brides in elegant dresses, then shifted his gaze to the VIP plaza where Surzex stood with his family and the Phoenix family. He noticed Ravel struggling to hold a smile. The brides had taken their places beside Razor, and Issei picked up on the awkward expressions from the women in Razor's peerage. The Phoenix clan leader began to speak, and Issei turned his attention back to Surzek's. Their eyes met briefly. Surzek's confusion grew when he realized Issei was accompanied only by Azazel. Issei thought about the explanations he would owe later. The leader invited anyone who opposed the union to speak now or forever hold their peace. Issei stood and voiced his objection, prompting gasps and a murmur through the crowd as people made way for him to descend. Razor frowned and demanded to know what this meant, and Razor's father watched in irritation. An uneasy silence fell when Issei reached the center. Razor smirked and suggested that Issei was merely envious, stepping forward to place a hand on Issei's shoulder as he lectured him about his future prospects and urged him to drop the disruption and let the ceremony continue. Issei removed Razor's hand slowly, his face unreadable. Then he called Razor despicable in no uncertain terms. The outburst stunned the assembly. Rias reacted with anger and moved as if to strike, but Razor restrained her. Razor told Issei that he could still avoid escalation by apologizing and backing down, his tone low and menacing as he warned of consequences. Instead of backing down, Issei laughed briefly, but the laughter gave way to a look of furious determination. He accused Razor of having committed unforgivable acts against members of his peerage. The accusation rippled through the Colosseum. Razor and his peerage stared, and Rias and the others were shocked and outraged by the confrontation. Razor's laughter then rose above the clamor, unexpectedly long and unsettling, and it quieted the crowd as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Finally, Razor's cackle ended and his sharp grin fixed on Issei. Razor declared with bloodthirsty excitement that if Issei wanted to confront him, then so be it. His father snapped out of his bewilderment and nodded. A magic circle appeared beneath both their feet and transported them to a place that resembled a giant chessboard scattered with pieces. Razor asked if Issei sought all the women, cracking his knuckles and preparing for a fight. Issei replied that he only wanted all engagements broken and activated his gauntlet. The intervener announced that the fight would begin on the count of 3. Razor told Issei to stand back with a ghoulish grin, watching him ready himself. They powered up together through a ritual chant until the count finished and the battle began. Razor accused Issei of envy, claiming he desired not only Razor's women but also his mansion, power, and respect, and demanded that Issei admit it. Issei let out a small, bitter laugh and denied being envious. Razor continued to taunt Issei about his past, mocking the life he had led and the fact that he had once been killed by someone he barely knew, then pointing out the Longinus in his possession as the reason Issei thought he could have it all. The murmurs spreading through the magic circles that served as communicators made the crowd's change of favor apparent. Razor kept taunting, suggesting Issei could not even pray for acceptance because he was a demon. Issei's expression hardened and his fists clenched. Issei lunged at Razor in a burst of rage, demanding that the laughter stop and calling him a bee. Razor watched with amusement as the injured Issei threw himself forward. He easily dodged the punch and sneered while the crowd cheered in support of Razor and some began to hurl insults. Surzek watched with great concern as the fight unfolded. Ravel stood not far from the Demon King, also tense. Azazel and Raynare observed in silence as Razor continued to evade Issei's strikes. Razor dismissed Issei as a frustrated child who had ruined his life and blocked a blow to demonstrate his dominance, but the impact forced Razor to step back in surprise when Issei's strike landed harder than expected. Razor admitted internally that the boy was not as weak as he looked. Issei demanded silence and attacked again. This time Razor reacted. He tilted aside to avoid the blow, delivered a sharp elbow to the back of Issei's neck that left him dazed, then followed with a heavy kick that staggered him and sent him to the ground. The audience erupted in cheers at the decisive hit. Azazel commented that it had been a good hit, and Raynare observed that Issei still had more to offer as he slowly pushed himself to his feet under Razor's amused gaze. Drake checked on Issei, asking if he was all right. Issei assured Drake that it was only a scratch and, despite the sting, gathered himself and said he was ready to continue. Issei extended his hand toward Razor, focusing his power. Both sides called out their power-boosting command and the field surged with energy as they prepared their assaults. A small sphere of energy formed in Issei's outstretched palm. Razor sneered at the sight, taunting that the attack was nothing and even mocked the red dragon for having such a pitiful bearer. He waited for a response. The gauntlet answered that the distance was perfect. Using that opportunity, Issei told his partner Drag it was time to end the fight and unleash Dragon Shot. The small sphere transformed into a torrent of energy. Razor crossed his arms to block the blast, reinforcing his defense with flame and managing to shatter the attack, which left a shallow crater at his feet. Issei followed with another Dragon Shot almost immediately, forcing Razor to dig in and brace as the ground beneath him crumbled further. Razor roared and reinforced his flame defense, but Issei continued to unleash rapid successive Dragon Shots. The assaults came in quick succession, pushing Razor to constantly defend, his posture straining as the barrage pressed him down and the battlefield scarred beneath their clash. His gaze flicked back for a moment to see the ground behind him begin to split and fly. Issei and the others unleashed their Dragon Shot, each volley striking the air with thunderous force. Razor clenched his teeth until his jaw ached, furious at the escalating onslaught. Razor let loose a roar that was answered by a sea of flames, which split and dissolved the great crimson energy overflowing from him. He breathed hard, focusing through the dust, and realized he had been pushed several meters from his original position. He resolved to finish it. The flames around his body coalesced into the shape of a phoenix, signaling that he intended to fight to the end. Issei, appearing through the haze, held a sphere far larger than before and prepared another Dragon Shot. The spell detonated with enormous power, sending debris flying and cracking the earth. Razor stumbled back and formed a large magic barrier as the attack bore down on him. He thought that he would not use a magic attack to defeat something he considered trash, and his eyes widened as the strike hit his defense. The Dragon Shot contracted for an instant before a shockwave rippled outward, carving a massive crater across the battlefield and shattering everything behind Razor. Flames fanned around him as he fought to keep the attack contained, but his barrier began to crack. Issei held his hand aloft, pouring everything into the assault despite obvious exhaustion. Both combatants strained, shouting and forcing themselves forward until a huge crimson explosion shook the field and blinded the spectators. Dust filled the air. For a long moment only the sound of stirring earth and wind echoed. When the glow finally dimmed, a figure slowly emerged. Issei remained tense and unsteady, collapsing to his knees with his hand against his forehead to hold back a sudden headache. He squinted through the dust, trying to see. Another figure came into focus, breathing heavily. Razor appeared changed. Flames wrapped around his upper body, rapidly sealing wounds and scorch marks. The upper part of his suit was almost completely shredded, exposing his torso, and he kept a defensive posture even though the attack had ended. Issei watched helplessly as the damage to Razor's arms healed within seconds. Annoyance tightened his features as he stared at the ruined suit. Razor, seething, whispered that his suit was ruined and that his wedding had been ruined as well, his teeth clenched in fury. He declared that Issei would pay. Flames suddenly ignited across much of his body, forcing Issei back into a defensive stance. Razor closed the distance with surprising speed, leaving a trail of fire. Issei scrambled to his feet despite the returning headache and tried to strike. Razor intercepted the blow, sending a burst of flame along the arm and following with a hard punch that knocked Issei off balance. Razor grabbed his neck and struck again, each hit harsher than the last. Issei staggered under the blows, reeling from the force. Razor continued to press the attack relentlessly, landing blow after blow that left Issei battered and struggling to stay upright. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the fight intensified. Asia, tearful and distressed, urged that they stop and expressed fear for Issei. Her plea faltered when she saw the cold resolve on the faces of Rias, Aquino, and Kaneko, and she fell silent, fear and concern growing. Ravel wanted to interfere, but her mother held her back with a hand on her shoulder. Surzex could only look away from the brutal spectacle. Raynare stepped forward despite the tension in the crowd. Azazel placed a hand on her shoulder and called out to Yuma in an effort to pull her back. The fallen told her that she could not. Watching with complete seriousness, Raynare pointed to the magic circle transmitting the fight and urged everyone to look. Issei tried to speak but was struck and staggered. A second blow to his abdomen doubled him over and left him unable to finish his words. Raynare said that Razor did not want him to give up and removed Azazel's hand from Issei's shoulder. Azazel grabbed Raynare's hand and pleaded with her to stop. Raynare sharply ordered him to let go, drawing uncertain looks from those nearby. Feeling watched, Azazel released her. One of the cadre muttered that this was a bad idea as he watched Raynare slip into the crowd and follow. Razor landed a final blow beneath Issei's jaw, pushing him to the edge of unconsciousness. Just as he was about to fall, Razor seized his arms and leaned close, telling him that he should have kept quiet and that this day would be the last of his life. A cruel smile spread over Razor's face, and he added a chilling wish for sweet dreams. Razor forced Issei's arms down and drove a knee that sent Issei reeling. Issei's vision blurred as his head snapped back and darkness closed in. That was his last memory of that night. The darkness lasted a long time. The only sound in the void was Draig's distorted voice trying to reach him. That voice seemed to pull him back, and slowly the darkness receded. Issei opened his eyes to a blurry bedroom. He realized he was home, but his body felt heavy and sore, his face particularly tender. A small whimper escaped him, enough to rouse the woman who had been dozing awkwardly on the floor with her face resting on the bed. It took him a few moments to clear his head and recognize her. He asked if it was Yuma. Raynare brightened with a lively smile and showed genuine relief that he had awakened, but she restrained herself from hugging him because of his injuries. She offered him water. He accepted awkwardly as she held out a glass. She seemed simply content to be near him and to take care of him. He noticed 2 plates on the floor, one empty and the other piled with meat and vegetables. The empty plates suggested someone else had eaten. He asked how long he had been unconscious. Raynare explained that he had been out for 4 days and that, since his parents were away on business, she had told people he had a contagious but non-dangerous flu to keep friends and the academy from visiting. She promised to make sweet bread and lemonade. He tried to stop her, but she had already left the room with the plates. He watched her go, trying to gather his strength. A figure leaning against the wall had apparently gone unnoticed because the door was open. He called Kiba's name softly. Kiba told him not to waste his breath and, though he had not been asked, expressed thanks. Kiba added that the wedding had been postponed by a month because investigations had been opened against Razor based on Issei's statements. Issei felt some relief that Kiba held no grudge. Issei muttered that he did not expect the investigators to find anything and that he had hoped a little extra time might coax some of Kiba's subordinates into talking. He admitted that they needed far more than another month of training to defeat Razor and that his earlier actions would likely prevent him from breaking in again. He pressed his hand to his head as a sharp pain flared. Kiba moved closer and explained that no one had been willing to provide a phoenix tear to heal him. Issei said he was not surprised. He noted that Razor's family despised him and that only Miss Ravel had been unable to help. He clarified that the headache was not just from his injuries but from recalling Razor's final strike, and he was convinced that Razor had meant to kill him. Kiba was silent for a moment, then he sighed, knowing Issei would not stop him until he had told everything. Kiba explained that Surzex had reported Raynare's intervention to save Issei. Razor had been initially unconvinced by her involvement, and the situation had become more complicated when the club president and the others recognized her. At that point Azazel had intervened on Issei's behalf. At first it had seemed Raynare might be sent to a dungeon, but Raynare and Azazel had negotiated an option Razor could not refuse. Issei reacted by dismissing the idea that Raynare's proposal had been sincere. Kiba nodded in understanding. Kiba added that Raynare had offered herself as Razor's wife, claiming she had intervened because she had changed her mind after their previous conversation. Issei interpreted the move differently and considered it a means to buy time rather than an act of devotion. They fell into a tense silence. Kiba could read Issei's thoughts as the younger man rubbed the bandages covering parts of his face. Kiba asked what he was thinking, and Issei admitted that he felt trapped. Issei acknowledged that Razor would not stand idly by and that Raynare revealing herself to everyone only complicated matters further. Kiba protested that Issei should not be angry with Raynare, reminding him that Raynare had risked her position to save Issei. Issei remained dismissive, insisting she had only delayed the inevitable to protect him for a while. Kiba, frustrated by Issei's stubbornness, pointed out that Raynare had been the one watching over Issei without break. Kiba recounted that every time he had visited, Raynare had been sleeping beside Issei, cooking for him, or simply sitting at the foot of his bed in the hope that he would wake up. Of everyone who had heard Issei's claims, Kiba said Raynare was likely the only one who believed him, possibly along with Azazel. The revelation made Issei lower his head and remember the empty plate he had seen earlier. He let out a long, strained sigh and accepted the situation with resigned calm. Kiba tried to reassure him by saying that the club president would not allow them to hurt Issei, that punishment might come but it would not be severe. Kiba offered to call her to announce Issei's recovery, and Issei nodded without expression. Kiba left the room and a small magic circle appeared above his ear as he made the call. Once they were alone, Draig expressed concern about the choice Issei had made. Issei replied that there was no use delaying the inevitable and fell silent. Draig searched for words to comfort his bearer but found himself inexperienced in such matters and remained quiet. A few minutes later the door opened and Kiba returned with Rias, Asia, Akino, and Kaneko. All of them met Issei with cold stares except for Asia. Asia, with tears in her eyes, moved to embrace Issei. Issei managed a weak smile and explained that he was glad to see her but that his injuries made hugging difficult. Asia immediately apologized and hung her head. Issei showed a respectful nod toward the club president and the other women, but none of them responded at first. Kiba, uneasy at the tense atmosphere, asked Rias what was happening. Rias announced that Hyoudou Issei was under death judgment for going against her wishes and leaving a criminal alive. Asia and Kiba reacted with horror, while Issei remained composed, as if he had expected this turn of events. At that moment Raynare arrived carrying freshly baked bread and oven mitts, cheerfully announcing that she hoped the bread would be to their liking. Her smile vanished when she found the bedroom empty, and the plate of bread slipped from her hands and fell to the floor. A short bridge followed as everyone absorbed what that empty room meant. Kiba later guided Issei through the dungeon, remarking that the cell was not as bad as it sounded. Kiba described the large cell, the straw for sleeping, and the bucket provided for necessities, and he mentioned that he had once been confined in a much smaller cell for years with his friends. Issei sat on the straw bed in plain white garments and echiyas that suppressed his magic, his battered face left unhealed. Despite his condition, he appeared outwardly calm. Issei asked whether Kiba's description was supposed to make him feel better, his voice flat. Kiba shrugged and said he was at least trying to help. He apologized softly for not coming sooner. Issei brushed off the apology with a quiet assurance that there was no need for worry. Issei maintained his usual emotionless expression but looked grateful as he told Kiba that he was even surprised they had allowed him to come. He then asked how the assassin was doing. Kiba replied that he had barely been able to speak with her. She had seemed in shock at first and then very upset. He hesitated before adding that she really. Issei cut him off with a hard, dangerous no, and the interruption silenced Kiba completely. After an awkward pause, Kiba asked if they had told Issei what was coming. Issei nodded slightly and explained that no one had directly informed him, but he had studied the situation. He told Kiba that the proceedings would be a judgment for defying Rias's wishes, overseen by 3 judges, and that the most important judges in the underworld were Surzex, Ajuka, and Razor's father, who would likely push for the harshest sentence. He added that the blonde man Razor would probably be looking for a way to avoid the trial to carry out an immediate punishment. Kiba confirmed that Razor had indeed asked for that. Issei raised an eyebrow and wondered aloud whether he should prepare for the worst. Kiba answered that Surzex, as chief judge, would never allow Issei to be destroyed entirely, prompting a short, bitter chuckle from Issei as he acknowledged that at least something was in his favor. Issei then remarked, half joking, on his new reputation as the renegade demon of the Gremory family and asked whether anyone doubted he would still do everything he could to help Rias. Kiba responded by asking if Issei thought he would ever question that. They fell silent for a moment before Kiba offered his help. Issei bowed his shoulders and asked Kiba to free him. Kiba looked away and said he could not. Issei slapped his hands on his knees in frustration and said there was nothing Kiba could do. Kiba bristled and reminded Issei that he was Rias Gremory's knight and that attempting to free him would be treason. Issei apologized sarcastically for making what he called an inappropriate request. Kiba insisted that the charges were serious. Issei was accused of letting a criminal go free and of acting against his mistress's wishes. Issei protested that he had never intentionally wronged Rias, and Kiba answered that was precisely why they had to hold a judgment. Issei sighed in annoyance and said that unless irrefutable proof appeared that Razor was in the wrong, he did not expect to come out looking good. Kiba noted that Issei was not the only one on the wrong side of things. He explained that the club president, Rias, had wanted a capture and execution order for Raynare, but Razor had prevented it. Kiba admitted he did not know how long Rias would side with Razor, since she believed that Issei and the assassin were conspiring to ruin her marriage and her life. Issei was quick to insist that Rias had nothing to do with such a scheme and that Raynare did not deserve death now. While she had been a ruthless killer, she was not the same person anymore. Kiba stood, wondering whether others would see fit to give her a second chance. Issei said that Azazel believed in her, and that alone was significant. Both men turned as a woman they barely recognized approached. Issei asked if she was one of the Gremory household servants. Kiba bowed his head and respectfully greeted her. The woman introduced herself as Grafia and explained that Surzex assured Issei the judgment would be in his favor because one of the main witnesses intended to testify on his behalf. Grafia told Issei that he must deny any guilt or contact with the criminal, since that was the only angle by which they could frame him. If he followed that course, he would likely face only a lesser punishment for negligence. Issei acknowledged Grafia with a short bow and asked who the other girl present was. Grafia answered that the girl was Asia Argento and that she was an acquaintance. Grafia asked Issei to convey his gratitude to Surzex and then left through a magic circle. Kiba and Issei resumed their conversation, each feeling that the situation was not as hopeless as it had first seemed. A short time later, Issei entered the courtroom escorted by 2 guards. Demons in attendance watched him with varying degrees of disdain, including Rias and her family, whose contempt was particularly palpable. Issei did not react. He could not blame them for believing what they did not know. He took his place at the desk and set his cuffed hands upon it. His eyes scanned the spectators one last time and found that Sona and her entire peerage were present. Nearby, Kiba was speaking softly with Soy. Surzex stood as chief judge and declared that Hyoudou Issei, pawn of Rias Gremory, was accused of being an accomplice who had allowed a wanted criminal to go free when he had had the chance to end her. Surzex asked why Issei had not killed the fallen angel Raynare. Issei replied that he did not understand what they meant and insisted that he had delivered the fatal blow himself. Razor's father challenged that claim, asking how Issei could explain Raynare's survival if the blow had been lethal. Issei said he had no explanation and suggested that it had been a matter of luck. Issei looked away, his nonchalant posture conveying that he was not taking the proceedings seriously. Ajuka observed that the case already seemed clear, then looked to Surzex to move on to the next accusation. Surzex fixed his stern gaze on Issei and noted that Issei was also accused of breaking the pact with Rias Gremory, going against her wishes and attempting to break an engagement she had accepted. The Demon King declared that Issei was currently recognized as a renegade demon and asked how he proposed to respond. Issei shrugged and reminded everyone that his intentions had already been made plain when he had interrupted the wedding. Razor's father spoke next with a dangerous edge, demanding that Issei drop the accusation against his son and tell the truth. Issei insisted that he had been truthful and that it was not his responsibility if others would not learn from their mistakes. Razor's father bristled at being called a delinquent and thumped his seat. Issei began to retort about the blonde man, but Surzex cut him off with a sharp command for silence and pointed out that Razor himself was not present for the hearing. Ajuka summarized that the accused pleaded not guilty and called for the first witness. The 2 remaining judges rose to receive the testimony. Aquino entered and took her seat. She testified that Issei had appeared envious of Razor from the moment they met and that he seemed to covet Razor's position and possessions. Kaneko followed and offered a similar account, adding that Issei's jealousy seemed tied to Razor's many allies and supporters. Rias then came forward and delivered testimony in the same vein, noting the tense looks she had exchanged with Issei and stating that he had stormed into the wedding because of his envy and frustration. Ajuka rearranged the papers and asked if there were more witnesses. Surzex raised his gaze and called for the last witness. A faint, uncertain smile crossed Issei's face, but it faded to puzzlement when Asia entered the hall accompanied by Razor. Razor leaned against the side of the door, watching Issei with a somewhat mocking expression. Asia looked very nervous as she approached the witness desk and took her seat. Surzex greeted her gently and asked her to introduce herself. Asia gave her name and, when asked to swear that her testimony would be honest, she nodded and affirmed it. Ajuka then asked if she knew the accused, and Asia identified him as Hyoudou Issei. When Surzex asked how they knew each other, Asia said that Issei served Rias Gremory and that they were both reincarnated demons in her service. Razor's father scoffed that the testimony from Gremory Circle already painted a clear picture and suggested that Issei had been trying to ruin his son's reputation. Surzex cautioned against drawing conclusions too soon and reminded the court that a single testimony could significantly influence the judgment. Ajuka apologized for the interruption and asked Asia what she had to say. Asia looked first at Surzex, then at Issei, and their shared glance lingered. She then turned her attention to Razor, hesitated for several seconds, and finally stated that Razor was guilty. She explained that, from her perspective, Razor had pursued his goals without regard for the wishes or well-being of others, driven by jealousy and a desire for personal advantage. She described behavior that had prioritized accumulation of influence and attention over the feelings and safety of those around him. Her testimony caused murmurs across the chamber. Rias and several others exchanged satisfied looks at the impact it had on Issei, who sank into his seat in obvious shock. Razor, for his part, could not hide his widening smile. Razor's father wore a satisfied expression and indicated he believed there was nothing more to add. Asia then added one more point. On the occasions she had visited Issei, another individual named Raynare had sometimes been present with him. The court reacted with surprise at that detail. Asia quickly clarified that Raynare was not involved in the actions under consideration. Ajuka and Surzex took in the testimony, and the judges prepared to weigh the accounts that had been given. A neutral pause followed as the court considered the conflicting statements and the implications for the pending judgment. The blonde concluded that Issei had lied about not knowing she was still alive, and murmurs returned. Surzex commanded silence, sighed faintly, and rubbed his temple as he said there was no evidence in Hyoudou Issei's favor. Issei interrupted to say he wanted to talk. Surzex paused, surprised. Razor's father smugly suggested Issei finally wanted to confess, but Issei shouted again that he only wanted to talk, and the court was surprised by his loss of control. Ajuka insisted one could only speak to confess, but Issei did not respond. He turned his gaze to the Gremorys, who looked pleased with the outcome. Issei said he had only wanted to save them, his voice carrying an unfamiliar venom that shocked the girls. He declared he had wanted to save their miserable lives, then fixed his glare on Asia, who could barely meet his eyes, tears forming on her cheeks. He shouted that he should have left them to rot on that cross. Murmurs of contempt followed, and Asia could only look away with quiet tears. Surzex tried to calm Issei, calling his name and attempting to snap him back, but Issei could not be soothed. He apologized to the Demon King and said he could not help it, then stepped forward toward the judges and announced he had had enough. Surzex asked what he meant, confused. Issei said he was tired of everyone treating him like he was stupid and accused them of taking advantage of his kindness his whole life. Razor's father denied it, earning a bitter laugh from Issei. Ajuka demanded Issei speak for himself. Issei offered a fleeting, false smile and insisted he had not acted for his own benefit but to save others, then said he wished he had never done it. He turned his anger toward Asia again and launched into a furious tirade. Much of that outburst was removed from the record. His words left the court in stunned silence and earned many disgusted murmurs, even from Razor. Ajuka ordered the guards to restrain Issei, and the two demons at the gates moved in. Issei called for them to stop, saying he did not intend to waste another second listening to falsehoods and that he would make their job easier. Surzex raised his hand to halt the guards and asked what Issei proposed. Issei demanded death by decapitation. The court murmured loudly as Surzex and Issei stared at one another. Razor's father and Ajuka then stepped forward to discuss the matter privately. Ajuka later announced that under the rules for a renegade demon, executions were normally carried out at the stake and that beheading was a lesser, prohibited form. However, two of the three judges agreed to lower the sentence to a painless death, since the actions had not resulted in critical harm. The decision was met with disapproval from the crowd. Surzex silenced the court once more. The Demon King looked at Issei one last time and declared that the judgment had concluded and that the execution would take place the next morning. 1 hour later in hell, Issei lay on a straw bed with his eyes open. The gauntlet of the dragon Draig materialized in his hand, and Draig asked if he was all right. Issei replied that it was no big deal and reflected on how few people truly cared about him. He named Kiba, Matsuda, and Motohama and guessed they would move on quickly, and he mused that his parents were strong and would probably manage as well. Draig said he had enjoyed their time together and that Issei had been one of his best bearers, even if they had not shared much. Issei smiled at that. Draig then asked if Issei was truly okay, reminding him that he would die in a few hours. Issei reiterated that he did not really care and that few would cry for him, and that everyone would eventually get over it. The dungeon grate opened as Draig was speaking. Issei sat up and watched Rias and her entourage enter. He observed without much emotion that he had thought they would be celebrating their victory with the heir of the Phoenix clan at that hour. Rias said she wanted to talk to him first and sat on a log pulled in front of his cell to ask how it felt to be condemned to death. Issei answered that he had seen better days and shrugged. Rias then explained that she had not originally intended to take the matter to court and had planned a private punishment to bring him to his senses. Rias told him that the man he hated so much had been the one to convince her to do it. Issei responded without surprise, his voice flat and distant. Rias admitted there had been a brief moment when she considered changing her mind, but seeing how everything had unfolded convinced her it was for the best. She leaned forward and told him that not only had he spread lies, but his true nature had shown through. He wanted them to suffer, and his speech had made that clear. The redhead told him that when he died there would be no one to mourn him, no one to remember him, and no one to care, and she asked him how it felt to live such a miserable life. Their faces were only inches apart, Rias triumphant and Issei a mixture of frustration and anger. Issei asked if she was finished. Rias said she was satisfied and rose to leave. She walked out with her attendants. Only Kiba and Asia remained behind. Asia began to speak but Issei ordered her to go, his reply curt and cold. She bowed her head and left sadly. Kiba stayed behind until they were alone and then stepped forward. Kiba produced a small magic circle in his palm and presented a round, wrapped pastry. He explained that Raynare had asked him to deliver it and that she had kept it soft. Issei accepted the gift with a single, quiet thank you, and Kiba nodded. The blonde watched as Issei opened the wrapper, sensing the awkward sadness on Issei's face. Kiba said his goodbyes and Issei returned the gesture. When Kiba moved to leave, he paused and stepped in to embrace Issei. The hug lasted several seconds before Kiba pulled back and playfully punched Issei's chest. Kiba waved once more, thanked Issei for his friendship, and left, closing the door behind him. Issei watched the door for a long while, uncertain whether he would ever see his friend again, then set the pastry before him and began to eat. He had not eaten all day, and the first bite brought a small, bright comfort. Each mouthful brought memories of the recent month's shared moments, kindnesses, the face of the woman who had given him the pastry. With each remembered memory, Issei's resolve weakened. He thought about how hard he had tried and how much he had done, but he could not stop caring for her. Tears came, and he allowed himself to grieve aloud for the things and people he feared he might lose. Draig watched in silence, wishing he could offer words that might reach him. A few hours later, Strange noises outside the cell drew Issei's attention. When the door opened, he greeted the intruder with a harsh thought, but the moment he saw Kiba, the anger faded. Kiba told him he had come to get him out. The two moved quickly through the dungeon. Issei noticed that the guards lay unconscious along the corridors, but there was no sign of violence in their state. Kiba hurried Issei toward the last cell in the dungeon and explained that Surzex awaited him there. When Issei asked where he would go, Kiba answered that Grigori would be his destination and added that Azazel seemed to have taken a particular interest in him. They continued through the grim corridors until they reached the final door. Kiba told Issei to touch the door and that he would be attended, then opened it and stepped back. Before leaving, Kiba stopped and hugged Issei again, then pulled away and delivered a couple of friendly punches to the chest. He wished Issei goodbye and reminded him to leave. Issei thanked Kiba for his friendship and his life. Kiba left, closing the door and disappearing down the corridor. Issei stood for a long moment, watching where Kiba had gone, and then knocked on the next door. Surzex answered, and Issei was surprised to find Ajuka and Azazel there as well. Surzex explained that the demon pieces they had used also functioned as trackers and needed to be removed for Issei to be free. He removed Issei's H&D CFFS. Issei worried that removing the pieces might cause his death. Ajuka produced a new demonic piece, a king, and said they would replace his current pieces with it. Issei thought that this sounded like an overreaction, but Azazel asked if he could think of any other way. Surzex urged them not to waste any more time. Surzex declared that there was an hour until dawn, and Ajuka nodded in agreement. Ajuka introduced himself as Ajuka Beelzebub and acknowledged that Surzex had explained the situation. He smiled and assured Issei that he could be trusted, then warned that the process would hurt. Issei cried out in sudden pain. Ajuka ordered Azazel to hold him, and Azazel moved quickly to restrain Issei from behind. Issei's cries intensified until Surzex muffled them with a cloth, damping the sound. Ajuka began to sweat as he focused more magic into Issei's chest to coax whatever they sought to manifest. Issei caught sight of Ajuka holding an artifact that appeared to draw out his energy into a small, dark bottle, but his vision drifted upward. His cries faded and his body went limp against Azazel as 8 shimmering pawn-shaped fragments emerged from his chest and drifted, one by one, into the black bottle. Once all 8 pawns had been collected, Surzex presented the king piece to Ajuka, who immediately set to work with it. Issei briefly regained semi-consciousness, feeling the cold inside shift into a sharp pain that quickly overwhelmed him and sent him back under. Before he slipped completely away, he heard Ajuka reassure him that they were done. Ryzavim read through various papers in the laboratory. Unlike before, the place looked tidier, cleaner, and quieter. The quiet ended when the hooded man emptied a bag of rings and gadgets onto the table. The hooded man praised the work and began to examine the artifacts. He adjusted his hood and warned that surveillance and personnel had increased by 800% over the last 100 years, making it likely he might miss someone on future assignments. The number 1 on his wrist became visible again. Ryzavim replied that the church probably still regarded them as a terrorist group, but that far smarter people had likely grown suspicious. The hooded man lowered his head at that. The hooded man then asked whether they could still use Kokabeel to hide their tracks. A faint smile crossed Ryzavim's face as he let a ring fall from his fingers. He said he was not sure, but insisted they must stop. Excessive greed would bring discovery before their first move. He noted that the current supply of twice critical was more than enough. The hooded man asked what they should do next. Ryzavim clasped his hands beneath his chin, repeating the question to himself. A bold, dangerous smile appeared on his lips as he decided they would wait. Their conversation was interrupted by a woman who asked if they had not already waited too many centuries to reclaim their throne. Ryzavim sighed, weary, and addressed her as Kateria. He asked if she had come to aggravate him again. The demon accompanying Kateria stepped forward and declared that they had had enough of hiding like rats and that, if Ryzavim did not join them, they would choose someone else to lead. His confidence faltered under a fleeting but deadly glance from Ryzavim. Ryzavim laughed, puzzling the other two. He shook his head at Shalba, amused, then told them they were no different from the usurpers. Kateria and Shalba bristled at the accusation. Ryzavim agreed to their demand to reclaim their thrones and announced that they would attack at the first opportunity. Kateria expressed surprise at his simple acceptance, and Shalba pledged his loyalty with a salute that Ryzavim dismissed. Ryzavim told them to leave him alone so he could evaluate some things, and the two left without another word. Once they were alone, the hooded man turned his gaze to Ryzavim and addressed him as father, his tone full of confusion. Ryzavim said there would be a change of plans. The hooded man asked if that meant they would attack the demons early. Ryzavim confirmed they would, but added that their targets would not be limited to those demons. The hooded man nodded in understanding. Ryzavim then asked about the hooded man's sister. The hooded man reported that training had been much more effective and faster thanks to her special conditions, but warned that if the process continued at that rate she might lose her sanity. Ryzavim dismissed the concern, stating that conservative minds were not needed in the demon world and that madness for power and fame was acceptable. The hooded man bowed his head in respect and reaffirmed their desire to become true demons. Ryzavim directed his attention to a nearby stack of blankets covering 5 figures, each attached to various machines and tubes. He observed that they were what they were. Issei woke up suddenly. His expression froze, his face pale and slick with cold sweat, suggesting his dreams before waking had been hostile or he had suffered intense pain before losing consciousness. He touched his body at several points, relieved to find no pain, and studied the surroundings more carefully. He recognized white walls and ceiling, the scent of disinfectant, and medical gowns draped over empty stretchers. It became clear he was in a clinic. Jyanzein remarked that Issei had finally woken and identified the location as one of the divisions of the Tower of Hope, noting that about 3 hours had passed since his arrival and that it was just getting light. Jyanzein added that visitors would likely begin arriving soon. Azazel then entered and told Issei that he was probably the first to visit. Azazel asked how Issei felt as he leaned against the doorframe. Issei answered that he felt normal and expressed surprise that he did not hurt at all. Jyanzein explained that pain was not expected after the restructuring process and suggested Issei must have suffered greatly during it. He checked his notes and confirmed that Issei felt perfect and would be able to perform any physical activity without problems. Issei and Azazel exchanged a brief glance, and Azazel adopted a more serious tone. Azazel anticipated Issei's thoughts about the trial and mentioned that they had left his pawn pieces in his original cell and had done their best to deal with the aftermath of the fight. He used a careful phrase to describe the cleanup. Azazel then stated plainly that, officially, Issei was considered dead. Azazel advised Issei that it would be best to keep a low profile for the next few days until everything was buried. Issei asked doubtfully whether that would make people suspicious. Azazel explained that they had not only taken the Rias pieces because of the tracking. Without them, Issei could not survive, and on top of that, many people had wanted him dead. Azazel added with a mocking tilt that they had eliminated him without a proper trial, and Issei rolled his eyes at the tone. Issei asked if he could leave now, his hope faint but visible, and Azazel's expression turned unusually serious. Azazel allowed him to go but asked him to wait a day. He wanted to speak about something important related to the post-mortem procedure for reincarnated demons. Issei's curiosity increased, but Azazel said Issei was not ready yet and they would talk at noon. For now, Azazel suggested he enjoy time with his friends and stepped aside with a small smile as Rick, Alan, and young Len entered and approached. Rick smiled as he set a chair by Issei's side and remarked that he hadn't expected to see them so soon. Alan, half in jest, asked whether they should thank the man responsible, and young Len nudged him to quiet down. Young Len insisted there was no time for arguments in his usual serious way, and Alan muttered a crude retort under his breath, which young Len corrected by clarifying his identity as Colian. Rick urged them that now was not the time to bicker. Issei laughed softly and the 3 friends looked to him. He admitted that Alan had a point and that being taught a lesson by that blonde adversary hadn't been all bad, which made everyone crack faint smiles. Alan approved of the attitude with a half smile. The conversation stopped when the door opened and everyone fell silent at who had entered. Raynare stood perfectly still, her eyes locked on Issei, and he met her gaze in return. Issei greeted calmly and raised his hand, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Raynare reacted with more visible emotion. Tears gathered in her eyes when she heard his voice again, because she had feared she would never hear it. She dashed across the room and, to Issei's surprise, leapt onto the gurney to embrace him tightly. Rick, Alan, and young Len soon recovered from their astonishment and exchanged faint smiles at the scene. Raynare, her voice breaking with relief, scolded him for making them worry, though the reproach was muffled by her overwhelming emotion. Issei finally relaxed and returned the hug with a small smile. He considered pulling away but chose to let her have the moment a little longer, knowing it was not the time to be fussy. Several hours later, in the Grigori artificial forest, Raynare asked why Issei wanted to train with swords as she made small, controlled moves while defending against Issei's strikes. Issei explained that Azazel had insisted he rest, but he could not remain idle. Training would help him understand opponents who used weapons. Raynare nodded and resumed the bout. They sparred in silence, the rhythm of their blades the only sound. Issei launched the first full attack and expected success, but Raynare moved gracefully aside, caught his sword hand, twisted his wrist, and disarmed him with a swift, precise maneuver that sent him sprawling. She then gave a brisk tap with the hilt to finish the technique, and Issei hit the ground with a thud. He complained while touching his forehead, and Raynare crouched before him with a hint of superiority, saying she had simply put him on the ground with his own weapon. Issei acknowledged her skill, adding with a teasing edge that it was impressive when she fought less experienced opponents. Raynare countered that he had learned to fight with little real hardship and asked whether he truly wanted to improve or was going to start complaining. She handed the sword back and turned away, resuming her stance. Issei lowered his sword and asked aloud whether Azazel had saved him out of goodness or some other motive. Raynare responded that Azazel was hardly sentimental. He did not save lives to feel good about himself and disliked doing actual work. If Issei wanted answers, Raynare suggested, he should ask Azazel directly. Issei fell silent. Raynare teased him about not having spoken to his benefactor yet. At that point, Issei declared they were done for the day and tossed the sword. Raynare caught it without trouble. She told him that Razor had called earlier to say that Issei's mistress's wedding had been delayed 2 weeks because of him, which meant her own marriage preparations would be coming up soon. She then reminded him of a past encounter, saying she had once defeated him by tricking him and using the situation to her advantage without remorse. Raynare told Issei that, after he had saved her from Razor, she had repaid that debt. She paused, and the two shared a serious look. Raynare added that she did not want to be indebted to him again. Issei stared at her in silence for a few seconds before turning away and telling her dryly that this had nothing to do with her. Raynare lowered her gaze, her serious expression waning into melancholy, and she called him a fool under her breath. Tower of Hope. A few minutes later, Issei arrived in the main hall where Azazel was seated at the large table. Issei bowed awkwardly and greeted him, and Azazel motioned for him to sit, explaining that he had brought some food because Issei had not eaten. Issei protested that it was unnecessary, but Azazel insisted that they eat first and then talk. Azazel made it clear with a serious expression that he expected Issei to listen without interruption, and Issei joined him. Kuo Academy. At that moment, Kiba came out of the academy and saw Razor standing with his group of fiancés, talking in pleasant tones. Razor remarked that he regretted not seeing a particular execution but expressed satisfaction with the way things had been handled and the sentence delivered. Rias noted that the person in question had been kind enough not to take her evil pieces. Razor brushed the subject aside and moved on to something else, teasing about wedding dresses. Kiba looked away and decided to ignore the conversation as he headed toward the club. Kiba's progress was interrupted when Asia appeared behind him, looking anxious and out of breath. Kiba put on his typical friendly smile and asked what was wrong. Asia, crestfallen, asked if a certain person was really dead. Kiba responded with surprise at her distress, then offered calm, practical advice. She had already made her choice and done what she thought was right, and now she could not change the past. The only thing she could do was not look back and move forward. When he turned away, Kiba's expression hardened again almost instantly, leaving Asia to ponder his words. She whispered that being told to move on made her feel as though she had made a bad decision, clutching her chest. Grigori. A few minutes later, Raynare arrived where Azazel had called her and noted that it was strange to be summoned so suddenly. Azazel cut short formalities, his tone grave and his face unusually uneasy, and told her it was about Issei. Raynare's surprise and concern were immediate. Azazel explained that if a reincarnated demon died, it could cause serious complications for investigations and lead to unsettling disappearances in the human world. Such events could create an unnecessary stir affecting demons and other entities. For that reason, the usual solution was to manipulate the memories of those who had been in contact with the reincarnated demon. As Raynare ran through the streets, she thought about the implications and hurried home, fear written on her face. She reached the house and forced the door open, calling Issei's name and receiving a thunderous response from the second floor. She ran up the stairs and found Issei in an intense emotional outburst. He lashed out in anger, overturning furniture and shattering the window in a storm of movement, then collapsed to his knees, crying out about his parents and friends. Raynare moved to comfort him, but he pushed her away in his anguish, then fell to his knees and wept, repeatedly asking why. Raynare tried to soothe him, holding him and murmuring that everything would be all right, though she knew the pain could not simply be erased. She stayed with him, offering what comfort she could. Several hours later, it was night and Issei sat staring at the broken window, having spent the hours in stunned silence. Raynare had tidied what she could and then left him alone to process what had happened. Memories of his parents and closest friends drifted through his mind like distant images. Birthday celebrations with his family, friends teasing him, parental advice about responsibilities and plans for his future. The voices and faces of those memories echoed in his thoughts as he sat in the quiet of the room. A sharp memory returned to Issei, one that began with a distant, anguished cry. His father had said that he only worried about Issei's future. Issei had asked why all the women seemed to hate him, admitting that he felt like an idiot who only wanted attention. His father had replied that he had never made a fuss about being with women and did not have simple advice to offer, but he had promised that eventually Issei would find someone who loved him as he was and that the only thing required was patience. Issei had brightened at the thought, and his father had warned him to stop being so direct. Issei had promised to try, though he had made no firm commitment. Those images of his parents and friends lingered now, each of them smiling at him despite his flaws. They had been everything to him. Everything had been taken from him overnight. He felt hollow, his body remained, his heart still beat, but his soul felt gone. Without Issei noticing, the bedroom door opened. Rick, young Len, Alan, and Raynare entered and approached. Rick placed a hand on Issei's shoulder to make his presence known. Issei and Rick shared a brief look before Issei rose and hugged him. Young Len and Alan joined the embrace in quiet solidarity. Raynare took his hand and guided him toward the door, watching him with regret as his gaze remained distant and emotionless. It was unsettling that he was not even crying. For a moment a faint light returned to Issei's face when he saw what waited outside the apartment. Alan had borrowed a bright orange, roofless Lamborghini for the occasion, and he climbed over the hood into the driver's seat, offering Issei a ride to clear his head. Issei hesitated, staring at the ground, but Raynare grabbed his left arm firmly and young Len seized his other arm before he could protest. Rick settled into the front seat and watched with mild amusement as Raynare and young Len pulled Issei toward the car. Issei cried out that it looked like he was being kidnapped, then angrily agreed to go and asked them to let go. Raynare and young Len exchanged a look and released him. He adjusted his t-shirt, waved his arms in frustration, and climbed into the car. Issei asked where they were headed. Alan smiled and said they would go wherever the wind took them, then put the accelerator to the floor and sent the car forward with a sudden burst. After the wild start, the group settled into a steady pace, music filling the narrow road. Although it was midnight, some pedestrians still lingered and turned to stare. One of those passers-by was a very pretty woman named Fall. Alan slowed to take a better look. When their eyes met, he made a playful finger gesture like a mock pistol. Fall raised an eyebrow and blushed at the flirtation. Issei rolled his eyes and asked what that had been about. Alan explained that he liked to flirt and enjoy carefree nights. He admitted that not all women appreciated his directness but that he pursued good evenings and pleasant company. Raynare remarked that Alan's behavior bordered on reckless. Rick observed that he had not expected Issei to be so straightforward in his tastes. Issei replied that he had been focused on other things until recently. Alan surprised the others by suggesting he had not gone after Raynare in the way they imagined, and Raynare felt a warm flush at the implication. Alan added that not every approach worked on everyone. They all laughed softly and let the topic shift away. Alan finished by saying that he was not someone who gave up easily. The car carried them onward into the night as they relaxed and listened to the music, the city lights passing by while the four friends rode together. Alan said with unexpected seriousness that he had decided it was best to quit, which took Issei by surprise. Issei asked why, and Alan explained that messing with a friend's wife was not honorable and that he considered Issei a friend. Issei could not finish his thought as Raynare leaned forward. Raynare leaned closer and Alan's face went pale. He had not turned to look at her, but he felt as if her eyes were piercing his soul. Raynare warned him to stop speaking nonsense or she would make him regret it. Alan quickly agreed. Raynare leaned back satisfied, then watched with curiosity as Issei and young Len flinched in embarrassment. Alan let out a long sigh and, with a lighter tone, remarked that the life of a pleasure seeker was not at all simple. Issei asked what a hedonist was, curious. Young Len answered that it was the modern way to refer to JRKs. Issei reacted sharply in disbelief, and everyone laughed, which made the tensions ease. They were slowly achieving their goal. Alan pulled up outside a bar and motioned for them to stop. Issei nervously said he did not think they would let him in. Young Len assured him that he was a regular customer at the place. Issei whispered and rubbed his hair. Inside, the owner greeted them warmly and asked how Len was doing and whether he had come with friends. Young Len replied that he had and asked for the usual. The owner pointed them to a table. Once they were seated, a wine with a careful, handcrafted presentation arrived. The waiter moved with practiced skill as he handed out and filled the glasses, putting on a small show before leaving them to enjoy their drink. Young Len raised his glass and Rick proposed a toast to better days ahead. They all clinked their glasses. Rick and Alan patted Issei on the back. Issei, who had decided to keep things low-key that night, smiled and commented that the drink was sweet and tasty, earning a few smiles and soft laughs from his friends. Raynare poured him another without waiting for a response, and Issei gratefully accepted. After several drinks, they went out for another drive. With a little too much alcohol and loud music, they made quite a ruckus, shouting and laughing. An old woman peeked out her window to scold them about people having to work in the morning. Instead of quieting down, Raynare climbed onto the roof of the car and made an obscene gesture at the woman, which infuriated her. She shouted back angrily before withdrawing, and the group burst into laughter and sped off. They calmed down and parked in front of the French Twins restaurant. Alan suggested one last stop, and Raynare agreed, stepping out of the car followed by the others. The twins greeted them enthusiastically. After everyone had ordered, Raynare asked to borrow the premises for something important. The twins exchanged looks. One of them agreed, while the other requested that the guests pay for everything consumed, lock up, and leave the place clean when they were done. Raynare accepted the conditions gratefully. After dinner, the twins left, trusting Raynare to oversee the place. She hosted a private gathering where she and her friends had a wonderful time. Issei, in particular, managed to regain a spark in his eyes. After a lot of dancing, Issei stepped outside the club to look up at the artificial stars of the ceiling. He took the last sip of his drink and glanced at the large clock that showed it was almost 6 in the morning. Rick came to stand beside him and put an arm around his shoulders. Alan joined them, placing a hand on Issei's shoulder. Young Len stood nearby with his hands in his pockets. Issei admitted that, despite the moment, things had not turned out the way he had expected. His friends looked at him for a moment and then returned their gaze to the stars. Issei recalled what his father had told him when he was young, that he could do what he wanted with his life, that he should decide his path and work hard for it, and that when he was old he would remember the times he had been happy and the times he had seen his loved ones happy. When Rick asked about his father, Issei explained that his father had died protecting him, as had some of his friends, many years ago, This was the burden of being born with a sacred gear. Rick expressed his sympathy, and Issei said not to worry because it had been a long time. Rick asked if Issei had sought revenge. Issei admitted that when he first arrived in Grigori, revenge had been his main focus. But over time his father's words had come back to him, and now, as a man, he could understand them. When asked what those words meant to him, Rick placed a hand on Issei's head and reminded him of when his shadows did not exist and the demons inside him had not yet formed. Rick said that Issei should remember the times when others had helped and supported him after mistakes. Those memories were recent and unforgettable. He paused and looked at Issei's melancholy face. Rick told Issei that he was probably thinking about revenge and warned him not to let that feeling win. He said that when clouds of despair and loneliness began to corner him, he should create a fire that not even the greatest deluge could stop. Issei looked at him with some astonishment after those words. Rick urged him to venture beyond that feeling and find happiness, to never give up his life, and to remember him if he was ever afraid, for Rick would always be near no matter the distance. Rick then interrupted himself to confess that he had wasted years of his life on revenge, sacrificing memories he could have forged, giving up feelings, and neglecting himself. He advised Issei not to make the same mistake, especially considering the great power within him. Rick paused, then looked at Issei with a toothy grin and expressed his confidence that Issei would become someone great. Rick hoped that when Issei had completed his life cycle, he would look back and smile, remembering nights like these and unique moments with his parents and friends, because those were the memories that truly endured. Rick hugged Issei by the neck even tighter as dawn approached. The golden morning shimmered and the stars were replaced by a warm glow suffused with life. Rick urged Issei to use his power to be happy and to make others happy, then asked him to promise. Issei remained silent, overwhelmed by Rick's words and the sunrise. At first it seemed he might cry, but he held back his tears and gave Rick a look that exuded assurance and calm. He promised. After saying those words, his gaze went straight ahead and everyone watched the artificial sky with small smiles. A small click sounded and everyone turned to see what it was. Raynare smiled and held up a camera, explaining that the scene had looked so good she could not resist. She then told them to stop being cheesy and help her clean up. Everyone re-entered the premises, though Issei kept his gaze fixed on the sky. Images of his parents and friends appeared there, and a faint smile crossed his face. Raynare shouted from inside the shop for Issei to come help, and he called back that he was coming. Then everything went black. A small particle illuminated a little of that darkness, glowing with a golden color. The single particle multiplied until there seemed to be an almost infinite quantity, the strong golden light joining with flashing energy until they formed the shape of a spear. The pressure and power it projected felt overwhelming. That rare moment was broken when a robotic, female voice announced that it had found him. Issei's eyes snapped open. His breathing was heavy and a sheen of sweat covered his face. He sat in silence for a long moment, wondering what that dream had been.